Hey guys, just a quick note before we begin that the show may contain spoilers and adult language, but that's just because we know how to have a good time. Stick around, you'll be glad you did.
You are here for me to enlighten you.
You ever act like this again, you're barred for life.
It's just vile and base.
It's kind of embarrassing.
If you know your lines, then you can forget them.
Oh, I get it. It's very clever.
Hello peoples and welcome to Esoterica Cinema, the podcast where we take films from the cinematic multiverse and discuss the hell out of them. I am the delightfully pugnacious Jason Peters, and with me as always is the man who once had to serve 30 days for punching Bryan Cranston in the face over a disagreement about frozen yogurt, Mr. Ryan Seabold.
Who's Breaking Bad now, bitch? Your nose. I broke your bad nose. Happy New Year to you, Jason. We made it. 2021, bitch.
Yeah, man. Nah, dude. It was a rough year. It was touch and go there for a minute if we were able to make it through. But sure enough, here we are. And what better way to ring in the new year than talking about movies, Ryan?
Absolutely. We could ring it in with the diving bell and the butterfly. Get it?
Ho-ho! That's movies and a pun, listeners. That's a 2-for-1 special, y'all. You're welcome.
I'm charging by the pun.
We got a couple good movies here, dude. Well, we got Diving Bell and the Butterfly, and we've got Dr. Sleep. And, of course, we're going to start off this segment with just one of them. And, Ryan, go ahead and set that one up for us.
Diving Bell and the Butterfly from 2007, directed by a Mr. Julian Schnabel. This is about Jean-Dominique Bobby, or Jean-Do, as they called him in the film. Editor-in-chief of French fashion Bible Elle magazine has a devastating stroke at age 43. The damage to his brain stem results in locked-in syndrome, which is a sumbitch. It doesn't say that, but with which he is almost completely paralyzed and only able to communicate by blinking an eye. Bobby painstakingly dictates his memoirs via the only means of expression left to him. Jason, what did you think about this movie?
I'll tell you in a minute, but first I just have to say that read was beautiful, dude, because I don't think either of us expected it to be as descriptive as it was. And you're like, when he breaks his spine and severs his spinal cord, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, probably wasn't the tone that was written in, but that was just perfect, man.
Man, I got nothing. I'm just trying to bring a little ray of sunshine to an otherwise bummer of a movie.
That's fantastic. So Ryan, I don't know about you. I loved this movie. I loved every moment of this movie. I have a lot to talk about here. And normally, listeners, right now we would start things off with a trailer for you. If you've listened to the show before, you know that when we do the foreign films, often we're not able to bring those trailers and clips to you. So that's going to be the case here. There is a dubbing option that you can listen to on the DVD, possibly streaming as well. However, on YouTube, there's none of those clips, so we don't have anything for you. Just Ryan and Jason for the next hour. Feel free to bail if you're not into that. But for our 4 to 6 listeners who enjoy what we have to say, let's get into it. So, Ryan, the film starts off and we've got this pretty interesting credit sequence. It's a photo montage of different x-rays and it's set to La Mer, which for those that don't know is the original Beyond the Sea song. And from there, we get our opening shot of the film. And this is going to set up a storytelling device that's going to be unique and heavily leaned on for the first third of the film. So the opening shot is very hazy. It's very out of focus, and we soon see these two nurses talking. They're going in and out of focus. The camera's floating around. We've got some sort of unique Dutch angles going on there. And before long, we realize that we're looking at the environment around us through a first-person perspective. And we're in the mind and head of our protagonist, Jean-Dominique Bobby. which is how they say it. I very much like how he says his name, Jean-Dominique Bobby.
Just call him Jando.
With that little Jando, yeah. So his friends call him Jando. He's played by, I want to say, Matthew Amalric. Might be Matej Amalric or Amalric. I don't know. I never spoke French. But great performance.
You don't
Either way,
say.
he learns that
that's a damn
That wasn't apparent. That wasn't
What the
self-evident by the way that I just lined up the French language and just took a frickin' sledgehammer to it right there.
Yeah.
Just mashed it into the ground.
Way more Inspector Clouseau than Amelie right now. You are.
I could also just butcher it with like a really like thick maudlin like Mathieu Amalric. And you can't understand what I'm saying, but it's like, but it sounds right. Go on.
Just go full Peter Sellers on it, and we'll be
exactly.
We'll get through
it's
this.
exactly what I was thinking. Either way, we do learn that he is soon woken from a 3-week coma after suffering a stroke. Now, Ryan, before we continue, again, as I mentioned, roughly the first third of the film, maybe a little more, about 40 minutes of a roughly 2-hour film, are told from this very unique perspective, this first-person perspective, the likes of which I don't think we've really seen done, except for, of course, Hardcore Henry, which I can't honestly say that I saw because I heard it was garbage. But what did you think of the way that the film was presented? Did that work for you?
Yeah. I mean, it took me a minute to realize this was shot by a Mr. Janusz Kaminski of Spielberg
Yes,
fame.
sir.
It was also produced by Kathleen Kennedy, so I'm sure she had the inside track on that. Hey, I know a guy. Let me make a phone call. I thought it was a little in your face at first. Maybe it was meant to be that way. Again, I watched this on a bigger screen, and man, you could see like all up in everyone. My first note is if I ever have a stroke or an accident of any kind, get me my space, man. Like, you could talk to me from a few feet away. I could hear you, and we could blink to each other or whatever we need to communicate through. You don't need to be, it doesn't need to be smell-o-vision. I don't need to be up in your mouth, which Kaminsky put us up in, up in some doctors' mouths. And then it was, some emphasis was put on the fact that he was going to have some sexy hot doctors, nurses coming in to help. He just kept stressing that. Don't worry, they look really great. I'm like, maybe are they good at what they do though, or are they just hot? Like, are we? What's the priority level structure level going here from 10 to 1? Where's hot and where is good at their jobs? I loved the first part. Dude, this movie is it's a beautiful movie. It's a very simple film. You don't really go anywhere exotic. There's no sweeping drone shots or, helicopter beach scene or anything like that. Nobody's riding horses. It just kind of is. And, Kaminsky had his work cut out for him. He said, here's what I'm going to do. And it was pretty interesting to watch considering you're in a hospital bed for most of the film.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I thought was most interesting was the way that they used the dialogue. And specifically, I'm talking about his sort of inner monologue dialogue, if you will. I know that sounds ridiculous, inner monologue dialogue, right? I guess we'll just say inner dialogue. That's probably right.
Sure.
But yeah, either way, the interplay. So to back up a minute, and in case anyone who's listening hasn't seen the film, the condition that he specifically has, Jean-Dominique Bobby, is that he has what's called locked-in syndrome, okay? And that's basically where his body is entirely paralyzed, but his mind is fully functioning. And so it's as if he is a prisoner in his own body. And so the way that the film presents this is we get this first-person perspective, and again, as you alluded to, Ryan, everything's sort of tilted and very close, and things are going in and out of focus, really super shallow depths of field that they're playing with. And it's really interesting because right away, it puts you exactly in the mind and body of the protagonist. As we're watching this, there's this really interesting sort of atmosphere that takes place where you're seeing and hearing the people that are speaking to the main character, but then you're also hearing his own thoughts in your own head sort of way. And, the inner monologue is bumped up relative to the exterior dialogue. And so you're being talked to while also hearing yourself think at the same time. And I think that when you have a movie like this that can so effectively place you in the mind, body, spirit, however you want to say, of the protagonist, it was a really unique experience. I can't say that I had really ever seen a movie like that before. I mean, maybe there's something that this borrowed from, but I certainly hadn't seen it. So again, it was as close to a unique and one-of-a-kind movie-going experience as I've had in a really long time. Did you feel the same way?
Yeah. Obviously, the closest thing that I could think of, aside from Hardcore Henry, Jason's favorite movie, is video games, first-person shooters. That's kind of the only thing that this harkened to for me, as lame as that sounds. That's kind of what it, reminded me of in that way. So, hey, Paralyze the video game coming at you in 2021. Julian Schnabel. It's a, rock star release. I don't know.
Funny thing, I know that we've talked about before how both of us sort of grew up on music videos, and we have like a great affinity for music videos. And,
I hope you're about to say what
them.
I think you're going to say, buddy. I'll have a lot of respect for you if you're about to say what I think you're about to say. Go ahead.
Do you think I'm about to say 4 words that go smack my bitch up?
Oh no. What?
Oh, man. Well, now after I finish, now I have to hear what you thought I was going to say. I don't know if you remember, did you ever see the video for Prodigy's Smack My Bitch Up?
I did.
Yeah, so a lot of that, this is actually, at times, I was reminded of that because that video is obviously very hyper stylized. The entire thing's told in first person. There's a lot of playing with the sort of frame rates and effects, and everything's very colorful and fast moving. And so, there were times actually where obviously, that's a much edgier sort of production, and this is much more lyrical and emotional than anything that production tries to do, but I was reminded of it at times. Now you got to tell me what you thought I was going to say. And by the way, sorry to disappoint you.
Oh, yeah, no. This is where I show my age a little bit and go back a little farther than you. This reminded me of One by Metallica. The black and white music video that borrowed from the old film Johnny Got His Gun, where the man was coming back from war, and he had locked-in syndrome, and it was the same thing. And it was done in actually a much more depressing way. And then the Metallica video where he's begging for death pretty much the whole time and saying, God, somebody please help me. Nobody could hear me talk and this and that. And I think he's even got like a bag over his head because he's been blown up in the battlefield and all of that. He's got bandages and stuff. It's awesome song, really sad music video, same kind of premise. But Smack My Bitch Up, that'll do too.
Oh man. So one of the things that I do like about the way that the film is presented earlier on is I do appreciate the way that a lot of the decisions are motivated and justified, right? So at first, when we get those first opening shots where it's kind of jarring and everything's super up close, and there's that constant focus going in and out of focus. Soon after that, we end up learning that this guy's eye is completely fucked. Like, he basically destroyed I don't forget if it's right or left eye, but one of his eyes is no longer irrigating itself, and it's going to cause the other one to fail.
Yeah, it's his right eye. He's a left eye blinker.
Correct, yeah. And so as you're watching this, and once they say that, it's like, oh, cool. So not only is there this really cool effect going on where it's sort of stylized, but it's also motivated by the storytelling. And so it has a reason to exist other than just simply it looks cool. So I appreciated that aspect of it. Now, this whole thing about his right eye not working leads to what I think everybody is going to agree is by far the scene's most harrowing sequence. And that is when we get the first-person perspective of his eye being sutured shut. Ryan, What did you think about that scene?
Yeah, fuck that. I mean, yeah. No thanks. Hard pass on that for me.
It was pretty squeamish, dude. I mean, it was like, I think I've mentioned this before when we were talking about, I forget if it was, The Lobster, actually. And he has the scene at the end where he's going to put the knife to his eyes. Anytime sharp stuff gets near people's eyes, that's my personal, squeamish torture porn response thing, right? So yeah, when you're sitting there literally watching, the eyelid and the needle and thread going in and out from an inside perspective, and then you take a step back to consider that, like, that's exactly what somebody's watching when they're in that scenario and that's happening. Man, I'd never considered what it would look like from the inside to have your eye sutured shut. And that was just, again, quite uncomfortable.
Man, I think about that constantly. Top of my fear list. Nope. Yeah, that was a weird one for me. Luckily, we were through that pretty quickly. I think you and I dealt with this before too during the Cure for Wellness, where he was getting his teeth removed.
Yep.
Yeah, that kind of stuff is no good. Put me under. Like, I don't know, just put me down. I guess if he's coming out of a coma, maybe putting him under isn't the top thing you want to do when he just woke up. Hey, let's put him down again. See, let's roll those dice. But yeah, again, if that ever happens, just, I don't know. I'd prefer not to go through this. This was a very self-reflective film for me where I said, yeah, fuck that. I had a lot of fuck that checklists crossed off on this one.
That would make a good fake commercial someday. Ryan's fuck that checklist.
Yeah. Well, this crossed a lot of them off. No commercial needed. Just watch Diving Bell and the Butterfly. You'll see a big old majority of them.
That's fantastic. By the way, I know that you're a big cinematography guy, and obviously, like I said, you know a lot about Chris Doyle that I don't know or anything. Are you super familiar with Janusz Kaminski and some of the different techniques that he used to get that specific look that he does here and in a lot of the Spielberg movies at the time?
No, enlighten me. What you got?
I don't necessarily have like a specific anecdote, but what he was doing is he was really experimenting with the approach to cinematography. So to the standpoint that, by the way, to everyone that's listening, in case, especially if you're younger, you have to remember that like this is, 90s, early 2000s, early to mid 2000s, Janusz Kaminski. So we're still very much on traditional cinema 35 millimeter film cameras. And so one of the things that he did, for example, is there was a lot of sort of general stuff like experimenting with the frame rates and playing around with sort of shutter speeds, whatnot. One of the things he actually did, so, and Ryan, I know you're better with the names of the equipment, but the little plastic piece that basically goes around that lets the appropriate amount of light into the film exposure, whether you set it to like 24 frames, 30, 60, etc.
Okay.
There's a little plastic piece that basically it flies around in a little loop inside the camera, and it prevents a certain amount of light going in, right? Because if that thing wasn't there, it would just be full on light. And if you blocked it completely, there'd be no light. Yeah. So basically what he did is he went in and he played, he actually like would shave out parts of the shutter to give it like different shapes so that the light would basically come in and hit film strip differently, which would then allow for a different exposure technique and a different look. Some of the other things that he was doing is he was shooting at one frame rate and then processing at another. So, for example, he would shoot at 12 FPS and then print it at 24 FPS. And so it gives it a very unique look to the motion and, a lot of the different elements to, again, just the look of his film, whether it's the graininess of certain films. And he was often doing a lot of this within the same movie. So he kind of started doing this in Saving Private Ryan. And again, you'll notice that there's a couple scenes where when you look at them next to each other, like they're not consistent, but for whatever reason, they don't contrast with one another either. So really, really interesting work from Kaminski during this period.
I mean, the dude's a badass. He shot Schindler's List and Saving Private Ryan. I mean, he's Spielberg's boy, going all the way back to like Indiana Jones and shit. Like this guy's been around. He's seen some things. Yeah, I that's funny you brought up Saving Private Ryan first, because that's the first thing I thought of when I was watching this in a first-person view is the storming the beach of Normandy scene. When you're seeing the view through Tom Hanks's first-person view on the battlefield at times. After he's been blown up, you get the ringing in his ear and all of that. And they use sound and visuals to really immerse you and put you in that moment as that character from time to time. And that's kind of the first thing I thought of when I was watching some of these same techniques, what you're saying. I didn't know that he actually physically carved out part of the shutter to let light hit the film differently. Makes sense, but now that you're mentioning it, that would be a weird thing to do. But yeah.
Yeah, and also, funny random aside, just because I don't know if anyone's ever seen him, but this is like a big, friendly Polish-looking dude, right? He was married for 6 years to Holly Hunter. Did you know that?
Who is this?
Janusz Kaminski was married for 6 years to Holly Hunter.
No, I didn't know that. People are married to people, though, in Hollywood. That happens.
She just loved the way that he shot her. He made her look gorgeous, and she was just like, oh, I don't have to pay him for this if I'm married to him.
Yeah.
Just lugging him around as like her own personal cinematographer for all of her movies.
Note to self, get better at what I do. Meet pretty girl.
Grab yourself a Holly Hunter.
Yeah. 2 more things on my checklist. Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit more about that sort of thing and who's married to who and what's going on here in just a bit. I want to get a little deeper into the plot first, and I want to get your opinion on a couple of things.
Fair enough. So when we progress from there, we actually start to get some backstory, and we learn that Jean was previously the editor-in-chief of Elle magazine. That's right, the Elle magazine. So, and this is a guy that lived a wonderful, charmed life. He had all the money, beautiful women, huge family, flying around here, there, everywhere, respect, everything that you'd want. And to your point earlier about the way that the film utilizes visuals and music, I really liked the sequence where he's showing all of the different things that he does. And I thought it was a really sort of like funny little touch, the whole little photo montage where he's talking about how beautiful he used to be. And then he's like, and we see, this guy with this rose and all these sort of like women playing around with him and stuff. And he's like, that's not even me. That's Marlon Brando. I thought that was a pretty funny little moment.
Like, oh, yeah,
and then
that's
from there,
me. There I am.
Yeah. And then shortly after we learn that, we've just spent a few minutes, living this high life and seeing all this beautiful, wonderful staging and cinematography, etc. We jump right back to him starting his therapy. And this is when, the 2 beautiful nurses like you're talking about, which, by the way, I'm sure was just to sort of help him out with it, right? Because, I mean, at that point, you're alone. Like, if someone's going to be, like, that up in your face, right? Like, why not grab a couple pretty women to help make it a little easier, right?
Well,
maybe he'll be a little more patient or something.
He was very well known to as a, playboy and hanging out with models and this and that. So I definitely understand why. It was just a weird thing to lead with. That's my physician, coming out of a coma and all of the things. And now I'm, stuck in my own head. I got locked in syndrome, but hey, rest assured, we got some hot chicks coming. It's going to be fine. It's like, no,
yeah,
that is not on my list of priorities right now.
And very quickly, we finally get the sort of crux of what's going to be the second half of the movie, if you will. And that's where they introduce the notion of how he is going to communicate with the outside world. So, they start with the whole system that they're going to read off letters of the alphabet in order of most commonly used letters to least. And he's going to blank once to indicate when they arrive at the correct letter. And they're going to spell out words 1 letter at a time. I believe I read something that said an average word took them about 4 minutes to get through in real life. So that's the method of communication that they devise. And Jean quickly becomes frustrated by the process, as you can imagine any of us would, really. He's this guy who's used to things coming very easily. He's used to being successful. And so this is also where we get the expression of the titular diving bell, which is one of those sort of old school diving suits that they used to talk about, the big metal ones, right, with the pump that goes through and the air's got to get pumped into. And he basically feels as though he's, trapped in one of these diving bells because he's got this locked-in syndrome, and it's very easy to see. And I really appreciated the cutaways that they made to that several times over the course of the movie, just to remind you it's a very apt metaphor. I liked the way that they used it. Shortly thereafter, he's going to receive a visit from this guy, Pierre, and this is also something that haunts him. He was a colleague of his previously, and there was an incident where Jean was on a plane, and this guy, Pierre, was like, hey, I really need to get over to, I forget if it was Paris, wherever they were going. Can I have your seat? It's the last seat available. And Jean ends up giving it up, and then that plane ended up being taken hostage. And Pierre, rather, by extension, was taken hostage for 6 years. And it sort of still haunts Jean to the point that he never even called him once he got released. And, from there he being Jean, receives another visit from a friend. Doesn't go quite as well. The guy's on the phone and calls him a vegetable, and, he gets offended accordingly. And I also like the moment that happened right after that, where Jean sort of suggests that he wants to die, and the nurse gets really pissed off at him. It's kind of, it was one of those moments where it reminds us, as well as the protagonist, that though this tragedy is certainly and uniquely his, it does extend far beyond himself, and that's sort of what I think a lot of the second half of the film is going to say. We're going to see, we spend the first half in Jean's mind seeing how difficult everything is, and then in the second half, we start to meet all of the people around him and all of the people who are supporting him and all of the work that they put into his recovery as well. And we understand that this is much larger than just him. And I really appreciated the way that they were able to sort of achieve both of those statements without conflicting on one another.
Yeah. So this is where in the movie where they pull out of that first person view and we start to go into a traditional cinematography scene, around the hospital and kind of following him around. We start to meet other characters, like not his wife, but the mother of his children, as he calls it, who is there as his support system. We also have brief flashbacks into a mistress scenario, Ines, I believe her name was, and we see different romps through his memories and him reminiscing while he's in the hospital bed of him having fun times on vacation with his mistress. And then we also meet his children, of which he has 3. And then there's he had we find out right around this time that he also has a lingering book deal with a publisher, and he has asked them to send someone to help dictate with this alphabet scenario. And so they send a blonde who looks very much like, I mentioned she's blonde because she looks very much like the mother of his children, and I kept getting those two confused. They would be dressed very similar. They looked very similar. They'd both be at his bedside. There wasn't a lot to really separate, who, I don't know. I just, I had a hard time.
No, I totally hear what you're saying. And even those two looked a lot like the 2 nurses.
Right.
And what's also funny, I don't know if you felt the same way. It took me like a solid 4 minutes to make sure that the one nurse wasn't Naomi Watts. Did you think she looked like Naomi Watts?
They all look like Naomi Watts. Yeah.
I mean, there are certainly worse people to look like, right?
Yeah. So they really kind of painted and I'm going somewhere with this, but they painted the mother of his children to be, the one by his bed, and then, they show him wrestling with his relationship there. She stuck by him. He kind of brushes her off at first, and she stands by her man. Then we have the mistress that ends up, it's heartbreaking to watch. This was right up there with the eyelid sewn shut scene, but the mistress calls up later in the film and wants to talk to him privately, but there's no one to communicate with her. The wife, or the mother of his children, is the one that is the only one there. It's on a Sunday or something, and she's got to dictate. So they end up, having this conversation about how the mistress still loves him and this and that, but not in this condition. And when he gets better, call. But and then meanwhile, the mother of his children / wife, whatever, that's been there this whole time, just has to like sit and dictate this woman's love to Jean Doe. So, kind of it's funny when we all have our ghosts and our demons and things that we deal with on our day to day. I thought it was an interesting reflection to show like when they all catch up to you a little bit, and you can't run, you can't duck, you can't dodge, you can't make up excuses. You just gotta take the blow, and that he took several of those, like you said, between his friend from Beirut, who was held captive, and then now this, and the wife, his children, and then it gets even deeper with the mistress and all of these things. It was the Playboy's life got caught, kind of caught up with him, and so that brings me to a point I want to make, and okay. I'm gonna kind of toss it to you.
Okay.
Supposedly, as I read in a few articles about this film, about Jean Doe, this is a true story. Supposedly, the mother of his children is the one that bailed and wanted nothing to do with him in real life. The mistress is actually the one that stood by his side and was the one that helped him learn how to communicate and dictate his book and all of that. And she got totally fucking hosed by Julian Schnabel, who decided he was going to turn this whole story on its ear, and paint the mother because he felt like that was the right thing to do. That was made for a better film, even though it was a biopic about a real person with real people that were still alive. Sans Jean Doe. Spoiler alert, he doesn't make it. But yeah, I thought that was kind of a douchey move that you would. So it kind of left me in this weird conundrum of, like, do I like this movie? And as a movie, I love it. But as a biopic, I fucking hate it because they like made some really big character choices. For biopics like this, when they make character changes for narrative purposes, is that something you support, or would you be against that, knowing that now? Like, does that make you see this movie any differently, or what are your thoughts on that, Jason?
Okay, so couple different things going on with that one. Firstly, to answer your question quickly, no, it doesn't change the way that I look at the film, so we'll just get that out of the way. Secondly, I do understand why such decisions are and may be made in such instances. I don't understand why this movie did that, because here's the thing. It's not like we've been super invested in really anybody except Jean-Dominique at this point. So if you were to present this movie to me and you presented it as it did happen in real life, as though his wife didn't want anything to do with him and his girlfriend was the one that was by his side, that wouldn't have changed anything about his journey, about his struggle, about the dynamic. And so it's interesting to hear you say that, because I don't understand why he felt it was beneficial for this particular story. Now, if, for example, let's say that like there was a situation where, again, just coming up with something off the top of my head, but if it was something where like Jean-Michel actually turned his back on his wife and his kids and embraced his mistress, I could understand why maybe if you were telling a certain version of that story, that might conflict with the character that you were trying to establish, right? Because maybe the audience would lose some sympathy for that character, right? Because, or you just don't feel like exploring that aspect of, illness and relationships and all of those things. But I don't see how changing that would have affected Jean-Dominique one way or another in this movie. So I get what you're saying, but I don't know. I mean, I'm just learning this for the first point. And look, there's a large contingent of people out there, a large contingency of people that what really happened and being authentic, it definitely has an effect on the way that they consume the art and the way that it affects their opinion of it. I'm definitely one of those people that's always sort of separated the art from the artist, and I know that the words inspired by a true story mean we made this up, but we started from somewhere that was true, right? Like, it doesn't mean it's an authentic representation. But like I said, normally when you see the changes that they make to stories, like I said, it's like, oh, well, this is problematic because, we need a good-hearted character, and if we allow this, then, it paints him in a negative light, and that's not what we're trying to do here. You do see that with a lot of biopics, especially the ones that are officially sanctioned by members of the family if it's somebody that's passed. Obviously they want to show respect, and it's difficult to go into some of the more negative aspects, right? Like the whole Dr. Dre scene from Straight Outta Compton and stuff like that. Like they really make him look a lot better than what really happened in real life, right? So I understand, a lot of the reasons for that, and that's a perfect example, I guess. In a movie like that, like knowing what Dre really did wouldn't play so well because we need to like Dre. So making the change in that movie for a mainstream audience that isn't familiar with NWA and doesn't understand that, these are ultimately flawed dudes from like a world that most of us know nothing about, right? That makes sense. So I guess to answer your question, I hear what you're saying. Didn't affect my view of this film, but yeah, I do wonder why they made that decision.
It's my understanding that a lot of the friends and family of Jean Do did not sign on, like they didn't really like this movie because of that. I guess he has 2 kids, not 3, and his kids are still alive, and they're like, who's this third one? Like, these people have family and friends and stuff, and you watch, character choices like that. It's like you're seeing yourself represented on screen. That's got to be a surreal experience. And so, yeah, I don't know. I just kind of felt like that was kind of a douche move on Schnabel's part. And I agree with you. I think that there are times when it's motivated, when it's needed in film, and sometimes it just waters it down.
Kind of going back to the moment where he decides that he wants to write this book, and they send the girl out to help him write it and whatnot. One of the things that I do like, because we touched on the whole diving bell metaphor, but we didn't mention the fact that this is also where the butterfly metaphor comes from. So he has this very wonderfully inspired speech, and it's set to some really interesting visuals where a butterfly is being born or metamorphized or what have you. And in the movie, his imagination is the butterfly, right? Because he's locked in here, and obviously we get the diving bell part, but once the nurse gets upset at him for suggesting that he just wants to die, it's kind of a wake-up call to him. And he basically says, all right, dude, you know what? This is your reality. You're a successful guy. You've done all this shit in your life. You've overcome way more than this. What are we going to do here? And that sort of becomes his call to where he's like, you know what? I want to write my book. And that inspires that phone call to the publisher. So one of the things that I really like is, again, it's something that I've mentioned before, but when movies really just talk about the nature of art and imagination and how important it is to us as human beings to stay mentally aware and healthy and all of those things, his imagination is what allows him to go to these worlds and crazy vistas that he's never going to be able to go to. And perhaps some people think it's kind of trite and cliched to suggest that, but it's a message that I'm more than happy to hear. I think especially these days where, art's been all but eliminated from school budgets and people just don't really give a shit about creators and who's making what and no one reads anymore. I think it's just really important that we remind people what constitutes art and how important it is. And especially, having gone through quarantine recently, there was a nice little bump where everyone was like, oh shit, we need to make sure that we show a proper amount of respect to all these creators of TV and music and books that are getting us through this difficult time. But it went away really quickly. It's just, it's our nature. But I think it's important that we recognize how important it is to stay imaginative and how much it has an effect on our health mentally and otherwise. And so I really enjoyed the imaginative moments as well. They talk about how the hospital used to be home to a ballet school and how it used to house royalty or something like that. And so, there's certain segments where Jean's being pushed through on his wheelchair through the halls, and There's a woman in a huge, 1800 style Victorian blue dress. And then there's, some ballet dancer who's dressed up like a cat, and he's doing a bunch of somersaults through the halls. And, we know that that's an artistic interpretation. That's obviously not really going on. But it's, again, a reinforcement of these themes that are sort of brought up and then explored instead of just being thrown out there as eye candy or style over substance. I loved that this movie was able to capture both the style and substance. And we see that in a lot of these different little examples. Now, one of the things I will give you, Ryan, is that the movie kind of does become a little bit less focused at this point because we're kind of just getting different snippets of his life and sort of, and then again, the life of people around him. But I think that it sort of harkens to one important aspect of that film, which is it's not a story-based film. It's very much an experiential film. It's about living the life of what this guy's going through and understanding the nature of this locked-in condition and then seeing how his family is affected, So we also get a couple really moving scenes with who just seems to have learned every language under the sun, Max von Sydow, who seems to know Swedish and German and French and English. I'm pretty sure he knows that click bush people voice language. Like that, this guy's nuts, man. Like he can do anything and he crushes everything, dude. Like he puts so much weight into that whole discussion where he's being shaved. And then later on, there's the scene where he tries to have the conversation over the phone using the girl as a translator, and he just can't bring himself to do it, and he ends up breaking down. And it's like, man, MVS is a hell of an actor, man. I got to go back and check out more of that dude's work because he crushes it every single time he shows up on screen.
This is our second Max von Sydow film, so let's just keep it going. Let's be a Max von Sydow podcast. I'm in. Our first was Wild Strawberries.
Yeah, well, and I know you haven't seen Seventh Seal, but he actually plays the lead in Seventh Seal. So I mean, he's just everywhere, dude, and he always delivers. I mean, I wouldn't say that he's necessarily a rangy actor, right? Like, I mean, he's always kind of got a general vibe that he brings, but it's always got weight and it's always a hell of a performance. And like I said, I would enjoy going back and catching more of dude's work from back in the day. Okay, now, Ryan, there is also one other scene that I want to bring up, and it's funny because in a movie that's filled with very emotional scenes and very emotional sequences, it was interesting that I found myself responding to this one as strongly as I did. So after they sort of flash back to the sequence that you referred to with his girlfriend in Lourdes or Lourdes, however you say it, and they ended up breaking up after, he buys her the flashing lady Madonna that she seems to really love. There's this scene where it's an orderly, okay? And he's cradling Jean in his arms and he's sort of floating him through this pool. I imagine it's sort of something to sort of keep his muscles from atrophying or whatever. And there was just something about the way that this orderly looked. He looked as though he was cradling his newborn son, and he had such genuine compassion in his face. And it just made me take a step back and remember that there are people that literally do this shit every single day, man, where they commit themselves to helping other people come out of these just horrible tragedies, or maybe they were born into some sort of disability, and it makes me think about all of the nurses and the orderlies and the healthcare workers that just selfishly dedicate themselves to bringing these people out of these really difficult physical and emotional and psychological situations. And I don't think that I could ever bring myself to just literally dedicate my life to other people's. And I would like to think that I could, but I don't think I could. I hope maybe one day I can, right? But
you're married with a child. I hope you figure it out one day, Jason.
Yeah, but that's different, dude. That's different because that's my family, dude. These guys, these people are not they're taking care of people that aren't their family. And you might think it's their job, dude, but like people have so many different ways of making money.
No,
and
I get
for
it.
These people
Yeah.
to just give themselves to everyone else, dude. It's like, just hats off. And if anybody listening, if you are one of those people, if you're a healthcare worker, if you're a nurse, if you're a frontliner, like, I have all the respect in the world for you, and I appreciate everything that you guys are doing out there to dedicate yourselves to helping people when you don't have to.
Especially the sexy ones. The sexy nurses is who, and physical therapists is who we're here for. Just letting you know, thank you very much for your service, sexy nurses. That's
Yeah, so and from there we sort of pivot to, the film's gonna wrap up here very shortly, and because this story is ultimately a tragedy, there's a lot of inspiration behind it, and there's a lot of beautiful positivity to take from it, but at the same time, Jean's story is a tragic one. So we get to this point where Jean's actually recovering pretty well, right? He started moving his head. He started moving his tongue a little bit. He can grunt, which a lot of the nurses, sing with him, and that's how he sings. But then, like, right away, man, he develops pneumonia. And because of his condition, this pneumonia is going to prove fatal. And so we quickly learn that, this dude is he doesn't have much time left. He's going to be going pretty quick. But he finished his book, and he got it out there. And so for our pretty much penultimate scene. So let me ask you this. So there's right before the last scene where everyone's sort of saying their goodbyes, we get like a long flashback. Now, after about the first 5, 7, 10 minutes, I was a little worried about this scene because I was like, what the hell is going on here? Like, why are we spending so much time with just going through a normal day of his at this stage of the movie? As it turns out, at the end of this shot, that's when we learn how he had his stroke, and we learn that he was out driving with his kid, and it just sort of happened. It was a day like any other. It wasn't anything that he was doing. He wasn't putting himself in danger. I mean, he was literally just, going to or from his house with his kid, and it could have been anyone else on any other day, on any other road, in any other vehicle, right? I think that was kind of the point of that. I did think it was specifically interesting because most films would start there, and so I really thought it was an interesting way to essentially end the film. And then that just shows that, and then it just goes to show that this is a film that took a very different approach. It gave us a look at this story through a lens that we hadn't seen before. And that's ultimately why I think it's such an effective film.
I think this scene, though, how do I put this and not sound like a moron? It was kind of weird that the stroke happened while he was talking at length to his adolescent son about hair on his dick, and why that mattered and why that was happening. Like, it would seem like I understand it was like a bonding moment, and maybe it was just the most French thing ever, to sit there and talk about hair on your son's dick, but kind of weird. And I think he even puts it that way. I'm like, man, I don't know. Yeah, that was kind of odd.
Yeah, it was. But again, I think it was just sort of to show that it was like, oh, yeah, dude, it's just a normal day, right? His son's 12, he's like, hey, you becoming a man yet? Maybe he does so crudely, but I also think that's probably in character, right? He seems like he'd be a very brash kind of guy.
Right.
So I didn't really have any sort of problem with that. And then I did think that it was cool because, again, it is a tragedy. He's going to die, but also we learned that his book gets published to great acclaim, and kind of one of those things where he ended up dying 10 days after the book was published. And so, whether he was just hanging on long enough to see that through, who's to say, but it certainly wouldn't surprise me. And from there, the movie pretty much ends with a reverse of a montage of some glacier meltings that showed up earlier in the film. And I don't know if maybe that's supposed to be like earlier things came crashing down, and now, even in spite of this tragedy, things are being rebuilt or built back up. So again, Ryan, to me, this was just, I can't say enough about how much I enjoyed maybe not always enjoyed, but I really enjoyed this movie, and it was very emotional, and I didn't think it was emotionally manipulative. So many times when you watch movies like that, it's like, it feels like a manufactured sadness, right? It's like, oh yeah, you killed this character, you've got the emotional swelling with the strings, and this was just sort of like a more creeping long-term sense of emotion. It didn't try to jam any specific emotional scenes down your throat. It was just, it allowed each of these very small moments to accumulate over time. And I think that's ultimately what makes this film so successful.
It's a pretty small film too when you think about it. Like there's nothing there's a lot of reasons to not be stoked about this film. As far as like nothing exciting happens, you're in the hospital most of the film. You're doing like a first person view for half, and then the other half you're just kind of following characters coming in and out of his room, checking on him, what's going on in his head. If I were to describe this movie to a friend and then say, no, really, you're going to love it. I don't know how I could like jazz it up, to talk someone into seeing it, but it's a good film. I have no reasons to not love this movie. This is a favorite of a lot of people. It's just, I can't really describe why I love it, but I do love it for the reasons that you said, I guess, just because it's a little, small emotional romp, but it really hits at the heart and really puts you in the shoes of, to your point, not only Jando, but also everyone around him that cared for him, even if those people were misrepresented, to my earlier point.
Absolutely. All right, Ryan, why don't we go ahead and wrap this up like we do with our 3 adjectives? What do you have for me?
I have claustrophobic. I kind of felt like the first part of the film really did put me in the shoes of Jando and kind of made me feel, but even after you broke out, like I was just saying a second ago, it kind of, you're still in the hospital and everything. You had a couple of beach days and they would wheel him out on the balcony from time to time. But, yeah, I mean, it's Metallica's one, or Smack My Bitch Up by Prodigy. I'm sure Schnabel really appreciates that. I put art house as my second word. This was an art house film at its core. I felt when I think of art house, like you said, the light leaks coming into the lens and the way that they filmed it and the sound design, the way that we're trapped in his head. I can't describe, I can't say this enough either. Like that this is a movie that on paper should not be enjoyable. And yet, here we are both loving this film. And divisive. I had a bigger problem with the character choices than you did. I thought that was kind of a douche move. I thought that exactly what you said. I think that some biopics have a reason to do that, and this did not. And those people are alive, and they went to go see this movie, and this is how they're going to be remembered: is the the shitty mistress when she was there every day helping him along, and now this is her legacy. Like these are real people that you're fucking with, and their legacy and their memories. So, and the kids too, and everything, and then to glorify the mother of the child. Let's look at the other side of that coin. You're glorifying a woman and showing her as a hero. Look, man, I've had some ex-girlfriends, and if I pass, don't you dare glorify a couple of them. Like, there's a couple of them that need to be remembered for what they were, bro. Like, they weren't nice people. I kind of had some problems with that. So I thought it was a little divisive, too. So anyway, those are my 3. Yours?
That's fair. Yeah, no, dude, that's totally fair criticism. So for me, the first one I'm going to go with, emotional. It's not something I don't typically describe myself as someone that enjoys, these overly emotional experiences. We saw that recently with Seeking a Friend, as we know. So, but yeah, man, the emotions in this one just worked for me. I think it was because they didn't hit you over the head and they allowed you to just sort of organically assimilate them. My next adjective, experiential. This is not a movie that is
good one
going to be, highly scrutinized from a story perspective, from a plot perspective. As you said, it's really ultimately a very small film. Like, in terms of the different story and character elements, there's not a ton going on. But it's all about just the visceral experience of living this guy's reality, of being put in his head. And then to your point, as you mentioned as well, everyone else around him and their experience. And then my third adjective, we've got a one of a kind, which is one of those hyphenated multiple words that's really more than one word, but we're just going to jam it together. And again, you know, for better or worse, whether you end up loving this film or hating it, I would say it's one of a kind. It's entirely unto itself. I've never seen a movie like it. And to my knowledge, you know, there's not a lot of movies that are out there. And who knows, maybe I'll come across something one day. But for right now, I can literally say I've never seen this movie before told this way. I mean, I saw this movie once, but hopefully you understand what I'm saying. So, so I've got emotional, experiential, and one of a kind. Ryan, slap a formal grade rating on it for me. What you got?
I'm going to give this a B+. I thought this was a really good movie, not a great movie. I really enjoyed this movie. I don't have much bad to say. I just think that there are better films that we've talked about or that we have coming up. It wasn't exciting. It wasn't holy shit. Like, there wasn't really anything it was just a solid, thorough B+ movie. 89%.
Very cool.
We'll give it 89%.
89% B+, like Seeking a Friend. Same. All right, well, so, I mean, I don't know whether this is going to come as any surprise to you or not, but Ryan, Diving Bell and the Butterfly gets a full-on 5 stars out of 5 from old boy Jason Peters here.
Wow.
I couldn't find... I mean, again, you know, I know you brought up the thing with, you know, the story elements and the characters. Again, even knowing it now, it's not enough to bump down my rating. I think this is a singular vision made from a passionate artist who really wanted to tell a story the right way, a unique way. It's a perfect marriage of storytelling device as paired with the story itself, right? So every single stylistic decision that this film makes that lends itself to that sort of art house aesthetic that you're referring to is motivated by either story or character. And that's so rare. And I really appreciate everything about this film. Full 5 stars. Standing by it.
I support the fact that you're willing to go to bat and say that it doesn't have to be a big film to be a perfect film, and that you can have a modest story, but as long as it's done perfectly, you're willing to give it an A+. And I respect the shit out of that, Jason. Tight work, bud. Seriously.
I appreciate it, buddy.
Yeah.
No.
I mean
I know. No. I appreciate it. I appreciate it.
I feel a little
for sure.
self-conscious
and I mean,
about my
and
B+.
that very much. And that very much trends with the only other film that I've given a 5 and your only A+ was The Lighthouse. And so that very much backs that up because, again, The Lighthouse was by no means a huge epic, right? So I think it says something about, you know, what we like and what we're looking for. And that's ultimately just a singular vision, right? Like, I'll listen to you tell any damn story in the world as long as it's entertaining. And an entertaining story can look like, you know, some crazy sci-fi comedy with, you know, aliens with thumbs for butts or whatever, right? Just whatever silly thing you can come up with, right? But it can also be a really moving story about a tender relationship or about an elderly couple coming to terms with what their life is now. I mean, there's any story under the sun can be told effectively and appreciated as long as it's not called Wild Strawberries. So with that, guys... With that, guys, we're going to go ahead and take a first commercial break here. Stick around. We'll be right back to talk some Dr. Sleep.
From the visionary minds at Aberrant Literature comes a new kind of anthology unlike anything else on the market. Aberrant Tales. Edited by Jason Peters, Aberrant Tales takes the very best stories in modern science fiction, fantasy, and horror and combines them into one unique anthology you won't be able to put down. John Cesarelli says, Aberrant Tales starts off with a bang and ends with quite the double whammy. Nick McCulker remarks, Aberrant Tales is fantastic. If you like shows like Black Mirror, this is right up your alley. And Michael Seybold exclaims, Aberrant Tales is Perfect, well-written and reminiscent of The Twilight Zone. I couldn't recommend this collection more. Read the book that has everyone talking. Aberrant Tales, available in ebook, hardcover and paperback versions, online and everywhere books are sold. Published by Aberrant Literature.
When I was a kid, there was a place. A dark place. They closed it down and let it rot. But the things that lived there...
Hello, Danny.
They come back.
Not many ride the bus this far north. You're running away from something?
I'm running away from myself, I guess.
Hi. You can hear me. You're magic. Like me.
I don't know about magic. I always called it the Shining. The world is a hungry place. A dangerous place.
These people, they hurt people like us.
These empty devils, they'll eat what shines. And they've noticed that little girl.
Well, hi there.
Get out of my head! Get out!
I haven't felt power like that in so long.
They're coming. Where are we going?
There's a place. You sure you want to do this?
I'm ready.
Yes, you run, dear. And then I will find you. And you will scream for years.
Come and play with us forever and ever.
Welcome back to Esoterica Cinema. That was the trailer for our next film, Dr. Sleep. Ryan, hit our listeners up with a description.
Jason, this is the sequel to 1980's The Shinin', as the Simpsons would call it. Struggling with alcoholism, old Danny Torrance, Danny Tease, remains traumatized by the sinister events that occurred at the Overlook Hotel when he was just a child. His hope for a peaceful existence soon becomes shattered when he meets Abra, a teen who shares his extrasensory gift of the shine. Together, they form an unlikely alliance to battle the True Knot, a cult whose members try to feed off the shine of innocence to become immortal. Jason, what'd you think about this movie?
I actually really dug it, man. I wasn't 100% sure what to expect from it, and look, the first thing we should acknowledge is this is a very different film from The Shining. I had actually read the book, both The Shining and Dr. Sleep, and the book itself is very different from both the book and the movie, which the book and the movie version of The Shining are very different as well. This movie matches the book very well. But yeah, sorry, that was probably a little confusing. No one knows what the hell I'm talking about now. I don't even know if I know what I'm talking about.
I certainly don't.
But I did dig it. And even when I read the book, Dr. Sleep, I did feel like it would probably make for a better movie than book. And that certainly ended up being the case here. What'd you think, man?
Yeah. This movie laid up and made par. Admittedly, okay. Stanley Kubrick is a tough act to follow.
Sure.
You know, that's just a classic film. Here's the thing, too. I feel like this... So you having read both books, I was always... My problem with The Shining is more about the rules of the movie itself. There This is a tough one for me because I love that movie so much. It's it's such a part of our culture. It's seen as a horror film or a suspense thriller. But I thought as a narrative, that movie, the original The Shining, not Dr. Sleep, was kind of all over the place. And this kind of cleared some things up for me as far as what The Shining was, The Shine, and because in the original film with Kubrick, you've got the Overlook Hotel and everything that is happening to Jack Torrance, the father played by Jack Nicholson, and so everything that's going on with that and the party and all the dead people that he keeps seeing and all of that. But you also have Danny Torrance with his shine and the red rum and him being able to, see dead people and so forth and communicate into the afterlife. So there was kind of these two things going on that I didn't understand in the original film, like what I should be paying more attention to, or what was causing the problem, or even what these two things had to do with each other. Was it that Danny Torrance was there in the Overlook, which brought these spirits out because of his shine, and that caused those spirits to torment his father, Jack? Or what? Could you clear that up for me? It's been a while since I've seen that movie.
Well, and part of that is, I think, by design, and that's sort of the Kubrick influence. Obviously, with films like 2001, Kubrick has demonstrated that he's not averse to, going with ambiguity and symbolism and not putting everything out there for you to see. The book, The Shining, really lays all of that out very clearly. I think that whether it was because Kubrick had some sort of problem with the source material, or whether he wanted to make something that was intentionally more obscure and ambiguous and not right there for you to know, that's not it's nothing with you, buddy.
Okay.
That's everything with Kubrick. Okay. Like, he intentionally made a point not to put all that information in The Shining. So the information that I'm going to give you really actually comes from the book.
Well, that's why I'm
more
asking.
so than the movie.
Right. I would expect Stephen King to know what's going on.
So, and basically, so what it is it's like there is this sort of spirit to the house. Like, think of the house as sort of like a living,
the house meaning the Overlook Hotel
entity, right? The Overlook Hotel.
Yeah.
Yes, of course. The hotel, sorry. So it's sort of like a sentient being of sorts, and it's drawn to the power of certain people, which is they sort of have an exaggerated life force or life energy that calls out. And it's sort of one of these classic ideas of like good versus darkness, right? So Danny basically has a very powerful shine, unlike pretty much any other person out there. The hotel feeds off of this shine and this energy, and it basically wants to inhabit Danny so that it can use Danny's life force to bring itself back to life. And so when we see some of these scenes where there's like the party and there's the different people that are attending the ball and, Lloyd, it's basically sort of like feeding off of Danny's shine to make those things come to life, but it wants to inhabit him completely so that it can sort of like use him as an almost like eternal battery and then absorb him. And, that's sort of, in the movie, they end up doing that a little bit with Jack. Also, interestingly about the book, it really focuses a lot more on Jack Torrance's alcoholism.
Okay.
Which I think justifies him a bit more as a character and makes him slightly more sympathetic. I mean, he's still an asshole, but like, I actually rewatched The Shining recently after watching Dr. Sleep, and I forgot, like, Jack's a really bad dad and a really bad husband. I remembered that, but I forgot to what degree. Like, he just starts out the movie just being so intensely annoyed by his wife and kid. And when you remove that heavy alcoholism aspect of it, because in the book he's basically white knuckling sobriety and he's like a handful of months deep. So every single thing that anybody says, let alone his wife and kid, is going to piss him off, and has nothing to do with that and everything to do with his alcoholism. So when you remove that and you make it more like he's just a frustrated writer that hates his wife and kid, it definitely makes him less sympathetic. So it was just kind of interesting, the decisions that Kubrick made in The Shining. I think a lot of them actually worked against the film and the story. I do kind of understand why Stephen King was a little bit upset about the decisions that were made. But at the same time, books and movies are two very different disciplines. You know, you can't really look at one through the lens of another. And The Shining is a great movie. I love it to death. It's got problems. It's probably Kubrick's least well-made film in a lot of respects. I do think the way that he chose to direct the actors, having them do take after take after take, ultimately led to a disjointed performance. I'll say this too, because it came up. I think Shelley Duvall gets way too much shit for that movie. She's really not bad in that movie. Shelley Duvall is never going to win an Oscar, right? She's not an Oscar-winning actress, but she does the character she does very well, and I think she does it about probably as well as she can, which is totally solid. And I don't understand why she was nominated for a Razzie and why people continue to talk shit about her performance in the movie.
Honestly, I didn't know she was nominated for a Razzie. This is all news to me, so...
Yeah. Again, I get, and honestly, when you watch Jack Nicholson, again, because I was actually laughing about this, like, nobody thinks about the poor editor that received the dailies from The Shining. And Kubrick's like, okay, I've got 32 takes of this one, and I've got 64 takes of this one, and you just go through them all and pick the best ones and make sure that they flow really well one into the other, okay?
Right.
Dude, come on. So when you watch it and you're watching this super disjointed performance where Jack's going various lengths of crazy, and, you know, sometimes he's at like a 6 and sometimes he's at a 12, and it's just, again, like, it really, I don't know that was the best choice to in terms of directing these actors in this film. So, but anyways, Ryan, let's go ahead and get to actual Dr. Sleep.
Yeah. I didn't mean to get off on a tangent.
The Shining for a bit.
It is, you have to admit, though, it is hard to talk about this without at least addressing its predecessor, and this one got me thinking a little bit about the rules of the game of The Shining itself, not the movie, but the actual powers that Danny Torrance has and other characters have, like Abra, and what the Overlook, the relationship of the hotel, has to do with that, and how that plays, because all those things get reintroduced in this film, and we're going to discuss it. So I'll let you go ahead and get us in. I will say that this movie starts in Florida in 1980, and nothing good starts in Florida in 1980. So you know you're in for some shit. Every movie that starts in Florida in 1980, I don't care what it is, ends in usually a lot of cocaine, some shenanigans that go along with it, and federal prison time or ultimate death. So anyways.
Well, it does start in Florida, and we do get some cocaine pretty quickly early on, so I guess this is halfway there, right?
Yeah.
Accurate. The movie starts with a nice opening shot. We do get that sort of classic synth-driven soundtrack from the original Shining that they reuse here. Takes us right back there. There's a really nicely lit overhead shot of the trees, and we get to do this sort of deep push-in, and it's a really long zoom, and eventually we see this girl sort of picking flowers. Like you said, Ryan, we're in Florida, it's 1980. This girl's approached by a woman in a hat. She's our main protagonist, appropriately named Rose the Hat. And, you know, she speaks in a very sort of unnerving fashion. It's a little protracted, the scene. And then all of a sudden the cohorts sort of jump out around and advance on the girl. Now, the funny thing is from there, Ryan, because we've talked about this before, I started laughing because the next scene, it starts Chapter 1. And now anytime a movie has chapter titles, I immediately hear you going like, oh man, we're in for a long one.
Dude, I actually have in my notes here, Chapter 1 - Solaris ?
But yeah, and I mean, it wasn't a short jaunt, dude. It was a solid 3 hours. I mean, we both watched the director's cut. And so, but I also didn't think there was really too much fat on there. I thought they did a good job of keeping it moving.
Yeah.
Despite its run length, I didn't really find myself bored or anything like that. So
yeah, and there were multiple chapters. My problem with Solaris wasn't the part 1, part 2 situation. It was that it took like 2 hours to get to part 2. And that was so disheartening because then it's like, number one, how many parts are there? And then how long have I been watching this film? It was kind of disorienting. Where this one kind of like, it did have to your point, there was a brisker pace. There wasn't a lot of fat in this film. And you and I watched the director's cut, which was a full-blown 3 hours long, plus.
Yeah, I think the theatrical cut's 2.5, so it's got an extra half hour in there. And it's interesting because I didn't really, like we said, we watched the director's cut full 3 hours, wasn't much fat, so I wonder what they took out.
Yeah,
because
same.
It didn't really seem like there was a lot that they could really, certainly not a half hour to take out.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm sure they made it work, but...
Yeah, I'd be curious.
Yeah, same. So, but so chapter 1 starts, it immediately brings us back to the hotel. They recreate the tracking shot of Danny on his tricycle going through. Room 237 hangs open. The old naked dead woman's in there looking creepy. And then we jump back to the house where Danny's living with Wendy, his mom, and they're still young, but they're also played convincingly by new actors that do a good job of looking like the old actors. And we find that the haunting or what have you of room 237 has followed Danny back to his house. The naked dead woman in the bathtub is actually in his bathtub. And one of the things that I did like, Ryan, so immediately when Danny's sort of going into the bathtub, they recreate the original in terms of, relative to the atmosphere and location that he's in. So, in the hallway shot, we've got Danny front and center. He's not on a tricycle, but he's walking. We've got, this sort of similar geometry that Kubrick sort of uses. And the door opens and, very slowly the woman pulls it back, the dead woman. So I sort of liked the comparisons to the film, the original film, that is. Right.
And no crazy fuzzy bears giving fellatio, which I'm okay with. For anyone that's seen the original Shining, that's always a scene that sticks out to everyone. Like, what the fuck?
yeah, that's definitely one of those WTF moments where it's just like, what? Because it's like some old dude and just a guy in a bear costume just like looks up or whatever.
I mean, after seeing Sweetbacks, I know how people used to get down. I know how people.
And interestingly, that scene is not in the book, so I think that was a Kubrick original. Oh, and by the way, speaking of what's not in the book, you may or may not know, but like the whole elevator with blood is not in the book at all. That's totally a Kubrick visual.
Interesting.
Yeah, I was waiting the whole book for it, and I was like, "Where's the blood?" And it wasn't there.
It was nice to see that creepy old woman in the bathtub, though, and I agree with you. I think the director here did a pretty bang up job of the winks and nods to the original, without beating you over the head with it, until the very end, where they revisit the Overlook Hotel when it becomes necessary. We'll get to that in a bit. That creepy old woman, though, had the black spots all over her. And it just reminded me of when white people put raisins in their potato salad. And I was like, man, it looks like raisins.
Wouldn't that be funny if that's actually how the backstory of how that woman died? Like she just choked on some bad potato salad.
Well, we all should have learned.
And then she has those bruises there as like a reminder, some sort of visual metaphor there.
Right. That's our behind the scenes trivia for everybody at home. I hope you enjoyed that. And then we go find out that old Danny Torrance is having a go in life. He's not doing so hot, and he's a bit of a drunken mess.
He's true. Well, but Ryan, before we go there, real quick, because this is an important conceit that they introduced, just because it is going to come at the end, is just the notion of like, so when Danny as a kid confronts the old woman. He has that scene with Dick Halloran, which is the old Scatman Crothers character, the black dude from the original, that also has The Shining. And he introduces Danny to the notion of these boxes or these chests as a way to deal with a lot of the horrors that he had experienced in the hotel. And so basically, he, being Danny, after advice from Dick, comes up with a series of chests in his mind, sort of like a mind chest. And he's able to psychically take the evil in the form of the old woman and lock her up in this chest. And that's how he is able to sort of move on from it. And he ended up basically taking all of these different traumatic characters that were haunting him and locking him up in these chests. And again, that's going to come up in the end of the film. Just wanted to get that out of the way.
Yep.
To your point, Yes. It's 2011, and we're in Jersey. Danny, like you said, not doing so hot. He wakes up naked next to a girl in a pool of vomit. And we get some quick scenes of, the night before. He's getting drunk. He's getting in bar fights. They go hook up a bunch of blow. And then when he wakes up the next morning, she's passed out. He's getting dressed, goes to steal her money. And as he does, he also sees a baby stroll out. And then, he, instead of putting the money back, he just goes to put the baby next to her, keeps the money. A psychic projection of Dick Halloran comes back again, tries to convince him not to, but he's like, meh, gonna take it anyway. And he does. From there, we're introduced
We also got
to...
that whole scene kind of felt very Trainspotting-y to me, too. With like Ewan McGregor, he's like puking in the toilet, stealing money. You got a kid coming out. I'm like, man, is this kid going to like crawl on the ceiling in a minute? Wait for it.
Yeah, that'd be funny if this movie was actually just nothing but a series of references to older movies.
Yeah,
so
and
yeah,
then
we're
I'm
gonna
also
reference
like
The Shining and Trainspotting and this, that, the other.
I'm also watching this scene thinking, yep, that's dating in your 30s and 40s. Oh, to be single.
Yes.
Oh, she's got a kid.
Yeah,
Shit, she didn't mention that last night. Well, let's just put him in the bed of vomit, take the money, Uber home. We're good.
Yes. I've been married / together for some time. So
thanks, Tinder.
Yeah. But live it up, buddy. Wake up into numerous piles of vomit for me. Okay.
I just got to start building chests. Hide those demons away.
Yeah, from there we're introduced to this Abra chick, if you will. She's a young girl. She lives in New Hampshire, and she's something of a prodigy. We see her sort of playing piano, but then record scratch, see the piano playing itself as well. And from there, we're also introduced to another character. She's a teenage girl in Long Island, and she's in a theater, and she hypnotizes this man who we soon find out is a child predator that was, doing that like To Catch Predator thing where he tries to lure some girl in a theater and take advantage of her. She ends up hypnotizing her with some sort of magic spell, something like that. He falls asleep. She steals his wallet and then proceeds to carve markings into his cheek so that he has to explain it to his wife and has like a visual reminder of his actions to carry around with him.
So pause right there. So did the 15-year-old girl in the theater, did she have the shine? Is that what she was using to hypnotize and everything? She had a similar magic power situation, or what? What was your take on that? Or do you think that was something completely unrelated and supernatural that was going on?
Yeah, I think it was something. I think it's, how to put it, sort of like a shine mutation, if you will, or something like that, right? I think that the shine sort of manifested itself differently in her because she specifically had a power that other people didn't, right? Whereas
of persuasion
Rose
or
could sort of
or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. So Rose could kind of sort of like astral travel, and Abra could do the same. And then, Danny can see what's going to happen. And then, this one had this sort of power of persuasion. It's like, I don't know, do you watch Umbrella Academy at all?
Yeah.
Have you seen that?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it's like, it was basically like the whisper chick, or I heard a rumor chick or whatever.
Right.
Just power of suggestion, and then that person basically can't help but do it.
So after having read both books, is it your take on this film that, and just the overarching story from Stephen King, that the shine can manifest itself in different ways in different people, kind of like X-Men mutations?
Honestly, I think it was kind of just a convenient thing that they didn't really put a whole lot into. I'll be completely honest, because it's not consistent.
Okay.
I mean, there's not really any other character that's like her, and everyone else's shine is pretty consistent. So I think it was just kind of one of those things where they wanted to have this character, and so they're just kind of like, she's got a shine. What kind of shine? I don't know. Different kind of shine, but it's there. Well, don't ask too many questions. Let's go.
And herein, having not read either book, herein lies the problem with both of these films for me. It's just that I never know at any given moment what the rules are or what I'm dealing with or who I'm dealing with and what their limitations are, what their weak spots are. Not that I need to know necessarily, but this whole movie of Dr. Sleep kind of unravels in that way, just in the sense that Our antagonists that we're going to get to next, who are watching our 15-year-old in the theater and about to prey on her and incorporate her into their cult. I never really knew like what their role was either, as far as where they came from or what their backstory was. I don't need to know everything and have it all spelled out, but it sure would be nice to know a little bit of the rules of the game. Like, did they have the shine? Is that another, or again, is it a completely unrelated supernatural situation, this cult that we're going to get into? I'll let you kind of introduce that, and then as you do, take my question into consideration.
Absolutely, dude. Absolutely. And those are totally fair questions / criticisms.
I have so many questions.
We'll see how these turn out. So like you say, Rose the Hat, that is, and then she's got this guy who's pretty much like her number 2. His name's Crow. He does a lot of her bidding, and they're basically watching her being the young teenager with the power of suggestion, and want to recruit her to some sort of whatever that they have. We haven't been introduced to it yet. We go back to Abra. She's having a birthday party. She's kind of interrupting the magician, saying, "Oh, I could do the stuff that you're doing," and he's kind of annoyed, like, "Yeah, kid, whatever." And then after the party's over, with mom and dad watching, she basically makes all the spoons, stick from the ceiling, and they're kind of rightfully afraid, and she makes them come crashing down, runs away. And then we sort of bounce back. Chapter 2 begins, and that's where we get introduced to the actual cult that Rose leads. The cult is called the True Knot. Now, here's the thing about them. In terms of motivation, I don't necessarily know that they have one. It's
just
unlike other sort of... Yeah, I mean, they're basically... Now, here's what's kind of interesting. I don't know if this occurred to you at all, but the way that these people are set up is they sort of have some sort of shining ability, right? Especially Rose's is super strong. But for the most part, really the closest thing that you can say about them is they kind of follow vampire rules.
Right.
When it comes down to it at the end of the day. But instead of feeding on blood, they're feeding on people's life force, which I guess is kind of like their soul as well, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so, the more that a person shines and the younger they are, the more that soul is pure and the more potent the smoke is that they're going to feed off of. So they kind of follow, I guess, in the same respect that, like, you with vampire mythology, you do have something with, Count Dracula and some of those other main characters, Nosferatu, etc. But a lot of the vampires, they kind of just survive. Like, it's almost animalistic, They basically just want to feed and fuck, basically, And I guess these guys are kind of not dissimilar from that in that respect. They just kind of travel around looking for specific types of food that they can feed off of because they have a lot of people to feed, and older people and people that don't shine, like, they do have some smoke, some life energy, but it's not really enough to go around. So they have to find these sort of very pure targets, these sort of white whales, if you will, that they can feed off of for a while, and they basically harness their life energy in these canisters that they bust out every now and then when they need to feed.
Yeah, so they bottle the life essence of certain people. I guess if they don't need it right then to feed, they've been able to have a surplus of this life force, which they contain in these special containment units, and they can breathe in as necessary when they're low on food, I guess. Because they're shown to... the members of the cult go to Rose and they ask her to break one out because they're all starving.
Yeah.
And she's like, no, we got to save it. I'm going to find us some food. And she's like, all right, fine. She goes and busts one out and they all huff it. And, then they're feeling good again. It makes them all young again. So in the same way as vampires, it keeps them young, it seems, as well. She even tells the 15-year-old character that she's going to live for a really long time. They're going to turn her. Something that I didn't understand was, I guess they found a value in their... I forget the 15-year-old's name. I'm going to have to look it up. Is it Andy? Snakebite Andy. So Andy, and so I'm not just calling her the 15-year-old the whole time. So my question is, Snakebite Andy, did they see a value in her because of her hypnotization powers to persuade people to get in the van, that they could, pick up little kids and stuff like that on the side of the road, like we see with the baseball boy? Or like, why didn't they feed off of her? Because they were obviously starving. I guess and why would they share their food with another mouth? Thoughts?
Yeah, well, and they had actually brought that up. I think it was basically brought up by one of the other members of the cult, and with every person that they bring on, it's sort of like a decision. Is it worth feeding off of them, or would they have more long-term value in helping them, get more people or whatever it is? And I think that, yeah, so with her having this particularly special ability, it's like, well, we could kill her, but she can also do a lot more for us by keeping her alive. So that's what, let's just convince her, bring her into the squad, and then she can help us go get some more people. So, which doesn't necessarily work out that way.
Plus, old man Gramps was on his way out, so they probably saw an opening in the clan. They're like, yeah, we're going to have an opening pretty soon. Gramps is on his way out. Let's go ahead and get some fresh blood in here.
Yeah, man. Yeah, absolutely. And so when we come back to Danny, he's actually finds himself in New Hampshire as well, and he's kind of established as a drifter. He ends up in this little odd town replica called Teeny Town. It's not really something that's too explored in the movie. It does actually have a larger place in the book, but either way, he does find the groundskeeper of the place, who recognizes him as a sort of fellow alcoholic and struggling person. So the groundskeeper, this guy, Billy, I believe is his name, he kind of takes him under his wing a little bit. He pays for him to put himself up at a local hostel or hotel for a couple of weeks while he figures things out, get on his feet, and ends up, also getting him to go to AA a little later, which is going to kind of be the turning point for Billy. So one thing I did think was great, I don't know if you caught this as well, I'm sure you did, but so Billy does take Danny to this first AA meeting, like I said, and the pastor who's running it talks to him, and he ends up sort of interviewing him for a job. Did you notice that the room that he interviewed him in was the same room that the guy interviewed Jack Torrance in The Shining for the job?
I did. I had to look it up to make sure that I wasn't going crazy. Because again, I haven't seen The Shining in a long time, but I've seen it a million times. So I was like, wait a minute, is that? Because I was expecting some winks and nods, and we already saw the old lady in the tub and all of that.
Yeah.
So there was a part of me that was waiting for little tips of the hat, and that was one of them.
Yeah, and it was a fun one. And again, I do think it's something that the movie works in enough, but doesn't necessarily rely on too heavily. It totally exists on its own, and whether or not you recognize those moments for what they are, it still works. So I did dig that in general about this film. From there, he does end up taking that job that he's offered, and he's working in hospice. And he actually very quickly establishes a reputation and becomes known as, wait for it, Dr. Sleep. It's where we get the name of the movie and book from. They call him Dr. Sleep because he basically visits patients right before they're about to die in the hospital that he works in, or the hospice rather, excuse me, and basically sort of mentally projects some positive feelings, thoughts, emotions, what have you, so that people, as they're passing, can go in peace. And there's also a little wrinkle where there's this cat, I believe it's Azalea or Azaria, something like that, where that can tell when the patients are about to pass on. And so it'll just go in and jump on top, and then people kind of, because of the reputation, now people know that when the cat shows up, it's their time to pass. So
that was an adorable, adorable way to go.
Absolutely. And an adorable cat, man. I love cats.
Yeah. I just was thinking about the verse in the Bible. I think it goes something about a rider on a pale horse, and his name was Death, and it was this white cat. And I'm like, man, what if that's the rider on the pale horse that he saw? It's this adorable little fluffy kid. We're expecting this terrible cataclysmic event, and nope.
That's awesome, dude. So we get that established out of the way. Then Danny goes back home. All of a sudden he finds the word hello written on the wall. And so that kind of sets up our next chapter, chapter 3, which chapter 3 actually starts with some really cool shots of like the Overlook, but it's sort of like decayed and decrepit. And I really dug those shots. It's just, and I don't know, by the way, too, but this was actually one of the few movies where like you could absolutely tell it was shot in digital, but it still didn't necessarily look bad. There was just something about the look to it where it was a little different, but they were still able to get like really, really good shots and some really good cinematography. Kind of reminded me of The Lobster a little bit, which was another one where you could just kind of like tell it was digital, but it didn't look like, 15 years ago when I went to film school digital or anything. Like, it's really come a long way. And I thought they were able to, again, get some really strong cinematography. Yeah, so from there, again, cool shots.
Supposedly, on that note, I read, I don't know how much truth there is in this, but I read online in some trivia blogs about this film that they actually used a lot of the old footage from Kubrick's film of The Overlook and digied it up with some snow and made it look all worn and weathered and shit. So, all the driving scenes up there, wow. They did day for night, and they used some of the day scenes from the opening of The Shining, the helicopter shots, and digied them up with some snow and all of that. So to your point, you're actually spot on that they actually did look very similar to our Kubrick Overlook shots, but just a little digital cleanup there.
Very cool, man. Very cool. Yeah. So, and then after we get those shots, we kind of bounce back to Danny. It's 8 years later, and he's sober now. He's accepting his 8-year sobriety chip. And he's talking about how he sort of, understands his dad a lot more, but there's still obviously a lot of pain there. And at the same time, we jump back to Rose, who's out with the true knot. Crow approaches her, says, hey, we're getting weak. We got to feed. We got to find something. Rose is like, no, we're cool. We got plenty of gas. And so she ends up busting out a canister. But shortly after that is when they're going to introduce the notion of the kid. The kid who obviously has The Shining to a strong degree, and he's parlaying that into a successful play as a baseball player in like a little league. And so he's like the little league star, and the Knot recognizes very quickly that this kid obviously has a shine to him, and they're going to go ahead and kidnap him very quickly. And then, there's kind of it could have been a lot worse, but there's basically kind of a brutal scene where they kind of basically just torture this kid. And
yeah, that was hard to watch.
Yeah, and so the idea is that, again, because children are more pure, they have a stronger life essence, and I'm sure just as a device to kind of, make things a little bit more squeamish. They also say that the more fear and pain you can inflict on somebody before and as they're dying, that basically enriches that smoke as well and creates more of it. So they're encouraged to, basically torture these kids and these other people as they're consuming them. So, but the director handles it smartly in that he doesn't, get right in there and show you the kid's guts getting ripped out, right? He pretty much just keeps it to, facial reactions and, the occasional sort of medium or wide shot where you can't really see too much. And of course the screams make it pretty brutal, but, again, it was for a scene that could have been a lot like Eli Roth would have handled that in just a way worse manner, right? He would have like, oh yeah, I'm gonna show you, we're just use your imagination, right? But
no, it was just the screams and the look on the kid's face. They didn't really get too gory with it per se, but they left it a lot up to the viewer's imagination. But I hated that scene just because it did make me a little squeamish watching, a child get tortured in that way. But I think that it was handled very well by the director, in so much as they left it up to you. So maybe that's on me. Maybe I'm fucked up. Thanks. And they turned this kid into a human vape pen, and they're all just, and huffing the smoke and everything. I thought, the whole, again, this whole thing with the pseudo vampire, they're just kind of riding this line of vampirism, which has been done, but they're like, hold on, let's make it worse. And then they're inhaling the smoke, but it's really just vampirism. Is that a word? Vampirism?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Vampirism?
Okay.
I think it's, vampirism.
We'll go with that. They're vampires.
I'm sure there's a strong vampire contingent out there that actually listens to us, and they're going to have some strongly worded letters headed our way for not showing this the proper amount of respect.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like emo versus goth, you know, that there's the sub-contingents on Reddit, whatever. This is kind of like that, but this is like vampires that vape. They're like
We're going to discover there's actually a huge difference between the vampire subculture and the vampire subculture.
Here we go.
With a Y. Two very distinctly different
imagine
crowds,
my surprise
Ryan.
when all 4 of our listeners are vampires. And
listen, our listeners expect a certain amount of vampire wokeness, okay?
All right.
So we've got to be sensitive and respectful.
I will do my best, and my apologies.
One of the other things I thought was kind of funny because it reminded me of A Cure for Wellness. But when it came to Rose's accent, did you have a little bit of a Dr. Vollmer thing too going with that?
Yes, absolutely. So she's actually Swedish and British, I think. So her accent's a little mixed up just naturally.
Yeah.
But,
yeah, she definitely was
Rebecca
switching
Ferguson. She's the beautiful talent in Ilsa, I believe, in all the Mission Impossible movies with Tom Cruise. So, we like Rebecca Ferguson, but yeah, her accent was a little inconsistent in this one. I didn't really know where to take that.
Yeah, at times it was British, at times it was American, and it definitely she was indiscriminate about which one she wanted to bring up at any given time. So, just had to get that out of the way there.
Yeah.
But so from there, Abra has this vision of them feeding on this boy, you know, and obviously that's very traumatic to her. So we jump back to her. She's, you know, it's 8 years later, so she's now a adolescent, you know, probably 15-ish or so, 16, something like that. And I thought it was really interesting the way that they did the next scene. So it's like we actually got a little bit metaphysical there for a minute, you know? So there's the scene where, like, you know, basically once Abra kind of sees what's going on, shortly thereafter, she basically like gets picked up. It's sort of like it's like a GPS thing, and like her and Rose's signals get linked up. So Abra's like sees that she's in this grocery store or whatever, and there's this cool scene where like her room flips over, and then her body ends up sort of like floating out of the window, and she ends up flying over to this like grocery store where Rose the Hat is, and then she's like, the Rose the Hat like notices her energy and like approaches one of like the frozen food sections and like reaches through the glass into Abra's room, who then like screams and breaks the glass and sends her like blowing back. And Rose the Hat soon realizes that like, oh, this is like what they call a looker, right? Like it's basically just someone with a shine that can like look in on a sort of astral projection level from great distances. And because she's so far away, she knows that she's so far away that she has to be like super powerful, and that if they were to get her body and her life essence, that they could feed off of it for a very, very long time, right? So in essence, Rose decides at that moment that she has to have Abra, and she makes the determination that her and the Knot are going to hunt her. Now, what's interesting is at the same time, Abra essentially has the same realization about Rose in a backwards way, where she realizes that Rose and the Knot are actually very dangerous, and that, you know, her having this incredible shine and she's very powerful, if she were to connect with Danny, who she's been continuing to sort of message with on the wall back and forth about various things, that, you know, the two of them could sort of join forces and take care of Rose and the Knot, who they recognize are a great danger. I actually do have a clip of the moment where Abra hunts down Danny. Let's go ahead and listen to that one.
You can hear me.
Let's use our outside voices, all right? You tracked me down?
It was easier than I thought. Like GPS, but in my head.
Look, I don't mean any offense, but this day and age, a grown man sitting with a teenage girl on a park bench.
I'm Aber Stone, and if anyone asks, you're my uncle, Uncle Dan. And that's not even a lie. Not totally. You're magic. Like me.
I don't know about magic. I always called it The Shining. And yeah, we both shine. Do your parents know?
About my shine? They don't talk about it. Or if I use it, they look at me different.
When I was a kid, I didn't understand The Shining. I called it Tony. I thought he was my imaginary friend.
I thought you were my imaginary friend. For a long time. How many of us are out there?
There's a lot of people who have a little bit of shine, they don't even know it. They always seem to come home with flowers when their wives are sad or they do well in a school test they didn't study for. But I only met 2 or 3 people in my whole life who knew they shined.
So a nice little exchange between those two. You know, they find out very quickly. They have a sort of natural rapport. I did like the chemistry, actually, that the two actors had. And it's funny because Ewan McGregor isn't exactly someone who often does a great job. And maybe this is just me, Ryan. I actually want to ask you, but like my opinion of Ewan McGregor, and you can tell me yours here in just a minute, is like he's always fine to good, and he's never horrible and he's never great. Like he exists in this like 5 to 7, 6.5 range. How do you feel about Ewan McGregor?
Yes, and he always finds himself in pretty stellar films overall. I've enjoyed his performances, but not necessarily because of him.
Yeah,
but he's charming. I think that's his gift. I think that's his shine. He's a charming fella, and he's got $1 million smile. He seems likable. He could play tragic well enough. But you're right. He's just kind of good.
I feel like well enough is actually a perfect descriptor. Like you can say, how was his performance in X? And the answer is always going to be well enough.
Well enough, yeah. Yeah, I mean, because think of the movies that he's in that you love. You know, let's take Trainspotting, for example.
Yeah.
Was it because he was in it? Or was the movie as a whole great? Was it Danny Boyle? This movie, did he make or break this film? No, he was well enough.
But I like Ewan McGregor.
I do like him.
Yeah, I do too. You know what Ewan McGregor is? He's the cinematic equivalent of a game manager quarterback in the NFL, right? Like one of those guys where it's like, look, man, I don't need you to throw 4 touchdowns and win the game for us. I got an awesome defense. I got an awesome running back. All I need you to do is keep this thing humming along. Don't throw picks and don't make bad decisions, right?
Yeah, right.
You're never going to win MVP, but you're a huge part of making sure that we as a team win this game and you have a role here. And that's exactly how I feel about Ewan McGregor every single time. Even when he tries to stretch, like even when he did even in season 3 of Fargo, it was like, okay, it's cool. I feel like Tom Cruise did this a lot better in Tropic Thunder, but you're trying here.
Yeah.
So moving on, we kind of get a reverse of that cool scene where now Rose is going to go on a little sort of psychic trip of her own, and she actually flies out through space. It's obviously her psychic projection, and flies into Abra's room and is going to sort of, kidnap her, do whatever she does. Lo and behold, it's actually a trap that she set for her, and as Rose is going through these giant stacks of boxes with, these things that she may have locked up, Abra ends up slamming the cabinet shut on her hand and trapping her. Rose is trying really hard to escape. Her hand gets mangled, but she is finally able to wrench it away and is able to, escape and fly back away. And we start to see that things are not as easy for the Knot anymore. When she gets back, we see that there's an old man there that's actually dying. He's what they call cycling, where he's kind of going through this ethereal phase. Like he's there, he's not, he's tangible, he's not. And again, cracks are starting to show in Rose's facade. This is another clip that I actually brought to listen to. So let's go ahead and hear the teenage girls start to question a lot of what Rose is doing.
I don't understand. You will. I thought we lived forever. Did someone promise you that, Andy? Did someone say you're immortal? I said live long, eat well. We can live long, very long. And we do, most of us. But we haven't been eating well. Not for a long time.
Rosie's going.
Rosie.
Yes, love.
I'm scared.
No, you're not. You watched empires rise and fall. She had the gladiators in Rome, sailed across oceans to new worlds. While you fed on kings and princes and popes. They wrote myths of you and made statues. And they trembled in their villages and beds and skyscrapers. So no, you're not scared. You're a king. And you eat fear.
You know what's funny, Ryan? I totally forgot what you said her name was and called her the 15-year-old girl.
Snakebite Andy.
Snakebite Andy. Damn it.
Sounds like a Toy Story character.
Dude. That sounds like some redneck-ass hillbilly that gets drunk up at the Sundown, which is a bar 2 miles away from where I live. It used to be called the Rattlesnake. Yeah. No, like Snakebite Andy, like wears an eye patch and drinks whiskey from the bottle and you know, warns you of the oncoming dangers of liberalism and shit, right? Like, that's Snakebite Andy.
You mean 70% of Florida?
That's awesome, dude. Yeah. It's funny because I live in like a very little sort of like conservative little patch of Los Angeles, so I feel like when you make some of your references, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, but minus the camouflage.
Yeah. But yeah, so you know, after that whole thing happens, chapter 5 begins, and Danny and Bill and Abra all go back to Abra's dad to sort of show him what's going on. He gets freaked out.
Well, first they got to go dig up the baseball kid.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, because old Danny T, was on the fence about joining in on this whole Abra adventure. He was just trying to downplay it and enjoy his little quiet sobriety town. And he gets roped into this whole Shining adventure, and begrudgingly. And she was like, I saw this kid get murdered. They're coming after me next. I tried trapping, this girl Rose and this and that. I turned her hand into a McRib, and now you got to go dig up this kid with your sobriety accountability buddy so that you can find out what the fuck is going on and help me. And he's like, okay, so all of that I'm going to take a no on. I'm like doing really well right now. I'm working as an orderly at the hospice. Everything's going good. Got a friend that's a cat. Everything's all right. And so then he goes and digs up this kid, which I wanted to ask you, what the fuck? Like, how do you explain digging up a kid? Did they just leave that kid there? Did they turn him over to the authorities? The director and author and writer of all this whole situation just kind of wrote that out. Like, I was like, how do you just go about digging up a kid? You're like, man, yep, there's a kid. And then you just get in the car and go home. They drove hours to get to that kid. And then, or if you turn it over to the cops are going to have you're going to have some splaining to do, Lucy. Like, I don't understand how you could just go turn a dead body that's obviously been poked, prodded, tortured, and drained of its life source. And then also when they soak up the juice, the vape juice, to sustain themselves, the knot, they leave nothing behind. They kind of disintegrate the body, if you will. So really, you're just holding on to a bunch of like loose clothing, I guess. I don't know.
Okay, well, here's the thing that I will say. So the reason that whole scene exists is to prove to Billy that Danny's not crazy. That's the whole thing. And then because Abra,
right.
and Abra ends up seeing it psychically, and so she knows where it is, and so she's basically like, Danny, Billy, you guys got to help me, and they're like, and then, Billy's like, whatever, so Abra uses her shine to find out where it is. They go, they dig it up, and then Billy is like, okay, look at that, you're not crazy. Yeah, let me join up with you guys and help out.
I see your point as a motivating factor for Billy, but also, wasn't it so they could get the kid's baseball glove so that Abra could touch it and psychically see where Rose was, so they could start to track her?
Aspect of it. Absolutely, yeah. So, I mean, it was justified, I would say.
No, it was totally justified. I was saying more or less like, what do you do with a dead kid now?
Oh, yeah, how they just kind of leave it there for dead. Or
it just seemed like, like an odd situation to put Danny in. Like, okay, now I got this dead kid. Now what?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, dude. I guess, we can even say maybe they address that in the director's cut because we watched it. So,
yeah. Anyway.
So that whole thing happens. Bill's in, everyone's in. They go back to Abra's dad, show him what's going on with a little sort of psychic projection touchy touch, and he's appropriately freaked, shaken, has a little drink, and they end up convincing him to sign off on a plan to use Abra to set a trap for the knot. Now here's another interesting.
No big deal.
Nah, she's been missing for weeks, and but I've seen her for half an hour. I know she's good. You guys run off, you crazy little scamps.
Most understanding family of all time.
Yeah. Very, very quick to change their ways of thinking. They're very progressive in that
They have written off spoons on the ceiling, pianos playing itself, totally normal. The kid disappears for major amounts of time. Also no big deal. No one told the mom of this plan of using the child for bait. Terrible husbandry. I don't think you could pull this off, using your daughter as bait for a murderous cult of gypsies and not tell your wife. How do you think she would take that, Jason?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that definitely falls within the realm of asking forgiveness instead of permission, bro.
Yeah, you're gonna need a lot.
You're not
more
gonna get a sign off on that,
on.
dude. You just got to do that happen, and then serve your penance afterwards. That's just how you do.
Got to use the kid as bait. Sometimes you got to do that.
Yeah. So one of the interesting things about this next scene is where they basically lure the knot and pick him off and stuff. Get to it in just a moment. Is that this is actually the end of the book. So,
wow.
Yeah, and instead of happening in the forest, it happens at the Overlook, and it's a sort of like a much larger sort of drawn out thing. This is one of the interesting things. So the filmmaker found himself in a very unique situation where he liked the book, he respected the book, he respected Stephen King, he liked the movie, he respected Stanley Kubrick, and he everything about that. So he actually not was forced to, but he put it upon himself to come up with an ending that would satisfy both Stephen King as well as fans of the movie, because obviously Stanley Kubrick is no longer with us, but he knew that people were going to be watching the movie as the sequel to The Shining, the movie, but especially with Stephen King still being alive, he really wanted to make sure that he didn't piss him off and have him talking shit about his movie the same way he did Kubrick's movie, right? So he basically worked to come up with an ending that satisfied both. So the next scene is basically Abra uses herself as some bait. She puts herself in a sort of in like a park, seemingly meditating on a table or sitting there, whatever. Rose and the True Knot find her, surround her, go to capture her. And then, like I said, we realize very soon that it's a trap. Danny and Billy are actually standing, up above behind some trees with rifles, and they just start picking them off one by one. And so within, a handful of minutes, pretty much everybody's dead. Rose isn't there. She's basically psychic projecting from elsewhere, and, she's kind of crying and upset that everyone's getting picked off as it's happening. But the one aspect of it that I kind of did like, that I thought was interesting, is when Bill's about to kill, God, what is it? Gunshot Alex? The hell's her name again? Cannot remember this.
Snakebite Andy?
Snakebite Andy. Gunshot Alex, Snakebite Andy, same thing. Whatever, dude. What's her name? Romeo Sixpack?
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyways,
man.
so Romeo Sixpack finds Billy, and she's basically like, you should kill yourself, and he can't fight it, and he immediately does. And I really like when movies do like those very sort of quick, came out of nowhere things that are, or actions that are still motivated by story and character. That was one of those ones I didn't really see coming. It happened super quick, took me by surprise. That was a nice little moment. But either way, Danny is still able to end up killing her, and so everybody at this point is dead except for Crow and Rose, I believe. Maybe one or two other people. And then the entire time that this has been going on, Crow's actually been making his way back over to Abra's house. And so right after they kill pretty much everybody in the forest, Crow ends up kidnapping Abra and killing Dad. And so, Dan goes back, he finds this, he's stunned. We get that moment with every alcoholic movie character where they're almost going to drink, and you're like, don't do it, buddy. But he's not going to, because this is, of course, this isn't the type of movie that's going to take us a chance like that, right? And it would probably hurt the sympathy, so I understand why they don't.
That dad, Abra's dad, worst parent of the year. For starters, you don't put your daughter up as bait against a bunch of psychic vampire gypsies. And number two, if you're going to do that, at least prepare yourself with more than a dull kitchen knife to protect yourself and your daughter, because when Crow comes in and he's armed to the teeth and ready to rock and roll, the dad pulls out a kitchen knife and says, don't come a step further. And that whole bit that we've seen a million times. It's like, dude, you're putting your family on the line. You did not tell your wife this was happening. You're in a lot of trouble, and you have armed yourself with a knife that you grabbed out of the kitchen drawer. Fantastic. You're doing a great job of parenting. What the fuck?
Well, and for what it's worth, too, is he didn't really seem like he was like your sort of a traditional man's man, They made it seem like he was some sort of like writer or intellectual or something. So maybe there was something to that, or maybe it was just poorly motivated. Who's to say?
Aren't you a writer, Jason?
That all depends. Do you have to make money to be considered a writer? Because if so, then no, sir.
I'd like to do a callback to episode 1 of Esoterica. Do you even art, bro?
Oh, if we're talking about art, yes, because true artists toil in obscurity until the day they die, and I am well on that path, sir. So
keep at it.
Hopefully my daughter can live well off of all of my work that'll sell 100 years down the road after I die.
Keep at it.
Doing this for you, baby girl. But there was another cool scene after that, too. So Crow is going back to, he has Abra. She's drugged. She's in the van. He's going back to Rose the Hat. And Danny realizes that he can basically psychic project himself. He can basically possess her body. And so, when Abra's passed out, Danny's able to locate her through the shine and then jump into her body and end up having a conversation with Crow as Abra, but really Danny. And I thought that was just kind of like a cool little dynamic. I liked the way that they sort of were able to take advantage of the rules that they had set up in ways that they kind of really didn't too much over the course of the movie. So I really liked that. And then I like the way that it ends where, they basically crash the van and Crow just goes launching through the windshield in very dramatic fashion.
Absolutely. Second coolest car crash we've had on this show, second to Cure for Wellness, which was also a pretty dope car crash with the deer.
Yeah, definitely, man. And, so obviously Rose projects, she finds out that, Crow's killed. She's, no. And then I thought it was funny because she's like, all right, I'm going to go take on this, Abra chick. And she basically does it by taking 2 canisters of steam to the head. And I don't know, it just felt like the equivalent of like, I'm going to get higher than I've ever been and go on a rampage, right? Like the skinhead who's like, I'm going to do an entire 8-ball to the head and then go crazy, right? Like, she's like, let's get high.
Vampire Bane or something.
So she ends up like taking 2 canisters of steam and, goes over to find her. Meanwhile, Dan picks up Abra and is going to go to Colorado to the Overlook to set up our 3rd and final act. And so it was, nostalgia, what have you. It was really, it's always just cool to go back to the Overlook, especially when, again, it is sort of a sentient character and it does sort of exist, again, as a character. And so it's almost like seeing an old friend again, it was pretty cool.
Awfully long drive from New Hampshire, though, yeah?
You'd imagine they had to fill up for gas more than once.
Yeah. Road trip to the Possessed Hotel.
Yeah, and then as they're driving up, it does a good job of mimicking the, overhead shots and helicopter shots from the original Shining, driving up the mountain, except it's at night instead of day. And, when they get there, obviously the hotel's been shut down for a long time. It's very dusty, very dark. And Danny knows that the hotel does have this crazy sentience. He knows that there's a potential that it could overtake Abra, so he tells her to wait in the car. She's also going to be a lookout looking for Rose. And this is, I think, kind of demonstrating the point of the question that you asked just at the beginning of this segment, which is, what's the exact nature of the hotel and its relationship to Danny and his life essence? Because as Danny goes into the hotel, basically the hotel starts to wake up again. And I thought that was really well done. And it's basically like, again, thinking of him as this sort of like psycho-spiritual battery of sorts for the hotel to be able to feed off of and come to life. We do see it start to come to life. I really liked the way, Ryan, that they used the different sound effects, like just the hums of some of the mechanical parts coming back on and the clinking of the electrical coils, kind of sparking and clinking back and forth to life. I really enjoyed the way that they did that. And then there's also a scene right after that where Dan walks to the bar, and I really liked this scene as well, where he has the same sort of Lloyd bartender engagement that his dad had, except Lloyd this time is basically his father, Jack Torrance. I do have a clip of this that I'm going to go ahead and play for people here, so let's go ahead and give it a listen.
Mom and I, we never wanted to see snow again. So we lived in Florida. Tiny place, but it was comfortable and we were happy. I was 20 when she died. And back then, I saw, when someone was gonna die, I saw flies. Black flies, death flies, I called them, circling people's faces. And in those last weeks, she was covered. Her whole face. I could barely see her eyes. And I tried to comfort her, but I could hardly look at her. And she saw that.
Maybe something warm to push away such unpleasantries.
Don't you want to hear about it? She was your wife.
I think you've mistaken me for someone else. I'm just a bartender.
Oh, yeah. Just Lloyd the bartender, pouring joy at the Overlook Hotel.
I'll pour whatever you like, Mr. Torrance.
Man takes a drink. The drink takes a drink. And then the drink takes a man. Ain't it so, Dad?
Medicine. Medicine is what it is.
So, Ryan, what did you think, by the way, of the new actors they got to play the old actors?
I thought it was done well enough. I know that's what we just got through saying about Ewan McGregor's performance, but yeah, I thought it was well enough. How do you... So, for starters, they didn't beat you over the head with it. They didn't milk it. They just kind of used it for what they needed to and got out. I thought that was the proper way to do it, to not be gratuitous. when Rose shows up to the Overlook and starts to confront them in the hotel in Meander, the only thing I thought that was gratuitous was the elevators opening up and the blood coming out and her watching this happen. And then she's like, not today. And then she like walks away. And I was like, that was a little beating me over. Like, I didn't need it. Kubrick did that perfectly. That was cool in that movie. We didn't need to see that. There's no way that just happens all the time, like the 5 p.m. show of Fantasmic at Disney World. You know what I mean? Like, the elevators opened up. Like, oh, shit, now we're on to some stuff now. Like, the parade's about to start, the parade of blood.
Yeah,
so
guys, come on. We got to get over there. The elevators are about to
blood's
open.
about
Come
to start.
on.
Although that would be cool if there was a Overlook hotel I could go visit, and that did happen every hour on the hour.
At Disneyland, like if just like one of the stores open up and Main Street just floods with blood. And it's got like the Main Street Electrical Parade song, like do 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 do.
But I thought that was a little gratuitous. It did kind of also remind me of, like, it was just fan service at that point, which is fine. But do you remember in the original Iron Man where Rhodey looked at the War Machine armor and he's like, maybe next time, and then he walked away, and only to find out that we get War Machine in episode 2. I thought that was kind of just a little bit like that too. It was just fan service and a little Easter egg, but it was a big old Easter egg. So it was like, I mean, it wasn't even an Easter egg. There was no hunt. They just like gave you the egg. It's like, all right.
Definitely.
But as far as the character replacements and stuff, I thought that it was done fine. I loved to see that bathroom again.
That was great.
I wish, dude, that red and white bathroom's the best. I know the flooring, the pattern on the carpet gets like probably the most attention in the film as far as being iconic. But that bathroom is always what I loved. That red and white, love it.
Yeah, man. Yeah, the whole thing's great. And I do like the way that the entire third act sort of references the original movie. Now that we've sort of gotten the ending of the book out of the way and the forest, we can kind of go back to wrapping up the movie. And so Rose basically arrives, and they're basically going to try to lure her into a mind trap so that they can capture her within the hedge maze. And I guess that's sort of like the ultimate plan, is to keep her sort of trapped within this hedge maze. Doesn't quite work out that way. Rose is quite powerful from the crazy amount of steam. And so she's, she's basically playing the aggressor. And I really like the way that they set it up to where it's sort of a role reversal where Danny is, playing the Shelley Duvall character in Wendy and sort of backing away from Rose, who's the aggressor, the same way that Jack was. And I think he's even got like a baseball bat or something, axe, whatever it is that he's sort of swinging at her as she approaches. And I think that it was a cool play. Even the shots, the way that Rose is going up the staircase and there's like the over the shoulder. It was a nice wink and nod to the original. And
a little crazy. His dad's typewriter is still set up and everything below the stairs. I'm sure some police investigators would have taken that as evidence after the original shit went down.
Well, and I think the idea too as well is that like the hotel is kind of planting these things there, whether they're 100% true or not, you can't really say, but I think it's like the hotel's like, remember the typewriter? Yeah, you remember, right? Come on.
Yeah.
Come back to old Overlook, huh? Who loves you, baby? The Overlook loves you. But, so she ends up shanking him, and she's got, she's about to twist the knife, and she's about to kill him, and that's when Dan ends up revealing that he has lured her into a trap of his own, and he ends up unlocking all of those boxes in his mind, going back to the beginning of the segment. And so that's where the importance of that comes in, is by doing that, he basically lets out all of the evil from The Shining, from the Overlook, that he had trapped up for so long, and then those people, or those evil spirits, everyone from the original, the twins, Lloyd, Jack, the guy in the bear suit giving the other dude head, right? Like, they're all back, and they end up sort of feasting on Rose's body, kind of like a zombie sort of thing. So I did kind of
I guess we know what part of the body Fellatio Bear took.
And I did like
Save
the way
some crotch for me.
I'm more of a testicle man myself. So just one is fine. I don't need both. One is fine. But I did like the way that they were able to bring that back, and sort of, again, they satisfied both the book and the movie very well. The box element plays prominently in the book, so they made sure to show that a proper amount of respect. And, from there, Abra runs inside. She rescues Dan, but he's also becoming consumed by the evil of this hotel. So then we also get what I think was kind of a cool little twist where he sort of ends up, the hotel is now gaining more power and it's having more influence on him. Abra's able to resist it, but Danny ends up, in essence, recreating his father's sort of pursuit through the hotel. And so he's like, chasing her with the axe or whatever. And they end up in the boiler room. And there's this projection of his mom that's there. Kind of makes them feel a little bit calm or whatever. But the boiler room goes off and the entire hotel goes up in flames. So, and then from there, so that's pretty much, he ends up dying. The Rose the Hat ends up dying. The hotel and all the evil associated end up... Basically, everybody but Abra ends up dying, including Dad. And so...
Yeah. It was sad to see Danny Torrance go that way after, The Shining and everything and knowing what the kid's been up to. But he had a lot of dead bodies to explain to the cops at the end of that movie. So it was probably for the best... I don't know. There's a lot of dead bodies. You just got to burn the whole thing down and start over.
Yeah. And then the funny thing too, Ryan, is that also references the ending of the original book, The Shining, where the ending of that book is that the hotel ends up exploding because Jack Torrance basically, like, he has to release the pressure in the boiler room every so often, because if he doesn't, then it gets past a certain point, it's going to explode. And so at the end of the book, when he's basically like going insane and chasing down his family, he totally forgets that he's neglected the boiler room forever. By the time he remembers and tries to run back down, it's too late and the place explodes. So this, I also think, kind of references and satisfies that as well. So Mike Flanagan...
If the Overlook Hotel explodes in the first book, how does it end at the Overlook Hotel in the second book?
So the funny thing is that they never actually go inside of the hotel. So everything that we're talking about right now, basically everything from the moment that they get to the hotel and Dan leaves Abra in the car and goes inside, that's all an original aspect of the story from Mike Flanagan that he wrote to satisfy the sequel of the movie. Because in the book,
when they're picking off the knot out in the woods, you
correct,
said that took place actually in the book in the outside the Overlook. So it took place outside the rubble of the Overlook. Why did they go to the Overlook in the first place, all the way from New Hampshire?
I don't remember what the motivation for that was. To be honest, I don't know if you know this. You do know. You mentioned it. Like, even now that he's sober, Stephen King books are still 900 pages long. And, it's just, there's going to be certain things that I just, like, I'm not one of those people that remembers every page and every story beat. I don't remember the exact reason. I do remember I didn't necessarily have a problem with it, so it must have been at least okay, because I do tend to remember the harsh things of like, there's no way, that's ridiculous, right? So, like, the fact that I didn't have that response tells me they probably did an okay job of it. But everything takes place on the outside and these structures outside of it. And I think it's also because they have like the trailers that they caravan with. I'm pretty sure that played into something certain way.
I just wasn't sure if it was like sacred ground, like an Indian burial ground, like a needful thing / poltergeist type situation, maybe that the Overlook was built on. If you had some insight into that, but I guess...
Yeah, no, this is just for whatever reason. Yeah, it took on a sort of evil. I don't believe it had really much. I think it was one of those. Yeah, I think it's basically like bad things happened at the hotel, and it's sort of like basically like the Overlook Hotel is your cast iron skillet, right? Every meal that you cook in it absorbs a little bit of the flavor. And so I think the Overlook had a number of bad things, and it just sort of absorbed a little bit of the flavor of those bad things, and it started accumulating over time until it just, grew and grew and needed more and more. So think that's kind of the general idea of it. And then the final scene is, Abra's back home. She's talking to Dan, but we soon realize that that's actually just a projection and he's dead. And, there's the whole thing about how people persist, beyond time, etc. So, with him having introduced the notion of the boxes to Abra, she goes into the bathroom to deal with the old evil woman from room 237. And, armed with that knowledge, she smiles and closes the door. And the movie's over.
That poor, creepy old woman, raisins in the potato salad, was doomed to live in public restrooms for the rest of her ghost life. Just watching people take shit after shit after shit in front of her. I'd be a little cranky too. So, it seems like a giant pain in the ass to be a ghost. So I hope ghosts aren't real. I hope I'm never a ghost, because Lord knows where I would get stuck. That'd be a bit of a bummer.
Absolutely. So, Ryan, why don't you go ahead and, as we do at the end of these segments, give us your 3 adjectives to describe Dr. Sleep, director's cut.
Yeah, so much like everything else we've described in this movie was well enough. I did not dislike it. I didn't love it. My 3 words are standard, because it's just kind of like, yeah, that is, yeah. And then worthy. I did think it was a worthy successor to The Shining, because again, tough act to follow. It's just such a heralded classic. To even take this on as a project, pretty courageous by the director. And so I thought it was worthy. I thought they did a good job, especially handling the classic characters and some of the character replacement, like what you talked about, bringing in the Overlook and all these things. So I thought it was worthy, but it was pretty, pardon the pun, by the book. I didn't think they really, I don't think they really went outside, the guidelines of how to make a movie. It just kind of seemed A to B to C. It did jump around quite a bit. If you, as the listener, couldn't tell by our description of this film, it was also very long. Stephen King movies can be very long. That's why you get 2-parters like It. A lot of his movies get made into miniseries. It's hard to wrap up, like you were saying, Jason, 1,000-page, 1,200-page book, into a film. So yeah. I'm glad we did watch the director's cut. I don't know what they would have cut out. I'm curious about that. I did not think there was a lot of fat on the bones here to trim. But yeah, standard, worthy, by the book. Not a lot of chances taken. It just kind of was.
Fair enough, my friend. Fair enough. I think I liked it a little bit better than you did. We'll formalize that here in just a moment. For my response, for my 3 adjectives, the first is a little on the nose, but suspenseful. I thought I did a really good job of keeping up the suspense. And, it's probably fair that it's a Shining sequel, but in the way that The Shining isn't a traditional horror movie, Dr. Sleep is even less of a traditional horror movie. I would say that it's not even necessarily like a thriller, though it kind of is, but it's almost like an action adventure thriller with horror and supernatural elements. It's kind of interesting. So, but it is suspenseful. And the other thing is that I thought it was efficient. Because like you said, there's very little fat on that bone. There's not a lot. Like I said, I would like to know what half hour or combination of scenes they cut out to remove half an hour from the film, because I thought that everything was pretty essential. And again, they didn't waste your time. And there is a lot of content from the book, and they really didn't cut out anything. So the fact that they were able to take, a roughly 900-page book and, present the whole thing efficiently in 3 hours, I found pretty impressive. And then
and it sounds like they stapled on an extra ending to it too.
Yeah. They got another 20 minutes or so there at the end. Yeah, absolutely. So I thought they did a great job of that. And then it was just an engaging movie. Again, like for some of the movies we've done, where Solaris or Cure for Wellness or Wild Strawberries, like, typically when we have a 2.5 to 3 hour movie, it's a little rough, and it feels like it's a little maybe self-indulgent, and it didn't, oftentimes it's like, like with A Cure for Wellness, right? We both agree you could have taken an hour of that movie, it wouldn't be any different. So the fact that a 3 hour movie can just hold my attention the entire time. Didn't, as you mentioned, sometimes didn't feel a need to look at the phone or get up or do any of that. Very engaging film. So suspenseful, efficient, and engaging is how I'm going to describe Dr. Sleep. Ryan, I want to hear what your grade rating is. I've got an idea, but I want to hear what you say.
C+.
I knew it, man. I knew it. The good old C+ for Ryan Seabold. His grade of choice.
Putting the C in Seabold.
Ryan C+ bold? Should that be your new
Yeah,
last
why
name?
not?
Yeah.
The plus is a bold move.
Oh. I'm sorry, everyone. We really should be striving for more than this.
I'm editing that out.
All right. Well, I think that puts me ahead of you then. Out of 5 stars, I'm going to go ahead and give this one 4 1/4. I thought it was I thought it was a very, very solid movie. I would put it as a very good movie, just short of great. And so again, so I'm going to go ahead and give that bad boy 4 1/4 out of 5 stars for Dr. Sleep. Guys, we're going to cut to a quick commercial break. We will be back after this with a comparison feature as well as some new films for you. Stick around. Welcome back to the Jerry Springer Show, ladies and gentlemen. Today we have a special guest in our studio. He is a celebrated author of the macabre and the supernatural. Please welcome Mr. Stephen King. Thanks a lot for having me, Jerry. Comfy chair. Now, Stephen, you are here today to confront someone that you feel has done you wrong. Is that correct? Yes, sirree, Bab. The name's Jerry, actually. And who is this person? Well, he's a man who took a crackerjack story of mine and turned it into just a bunch of Tommy rot. And, why do you think he made these changes? Because he's a carpetbagger and a plebeian? I'm telling you, this one's a real butter and egg man, he is. All right, well, let's go ahead and bring him out, ladies and gentlemen. Please welcome to the show, Mr. Stanley Kubrick. Well, hello to all you fine folks out there, and let me just be the first to say, suck my monolith, you uncultured miscreants. Charming. Stanley, thanks for coming on the show. Well, anything for you, Jerry. Do you recognize the man sitting across from you? Well, it's hard to say exactly, but if he is who I think he is, then I'm looking at a failed artist who hoodwinked an entire generation into thinking he writes scary novels. Psh, better than making boring movies. Stanley, Stephen claims that you actually altered a number of ideas from his book. Is that true? Well, certainly. I mean, I wasn't going to attach my name to crap, so I had to make it better. Aw, come on, man. What was crappy about it, Stanley? Well, instead of really examining the psychological torture this protagonist was going through, the would-be author chose to simply make him a drunk that gets chased by lawn decorations. I couldn't abide that. You know, I'm a better writer than you'll ever be. That's why every single one of your screenplays is based on someone else's book. Well, really? Okay, that's interesting. So, you know what I want you to do is, I want you to do me a favor. I want you to take all the most famous scenes from the film and tell me who wrote them. Blood in the elevator? Yeah, that's me. Creepy twins? Yeah, me again. All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy? Let me see, who was that? Oh yeah, that was me. You want me to keep going and mention the hedge maze? Wait a minute. Steven, is all that true? Well, maybe. Aww. But that doesn't mean you had to go changing my character's name from John to Jack. Well, John's a stupid name, isn't it? I mean, it's like Steven. You put a P and H and it makes a V sound? What the hell is that? Hey, you, man. Well, Well, that's just the level of eloquence I'd expect from a man who ingested so much cocaine he doesn't even remember writing a stupid book about an evil dog.
You know what? That's it. Eat chair, motherfucker.
Whoa, settle down, guys.
He started it.
And I'm gonna finish it, too. Just like I finished your wife last night.
Leave Tabitha out of this!
Fuck you! Fuck you! Fuck you! Fuck you! Fuck you! Fuck you! I think we're gonna have to take a quick commercial break here. We'll be back after these messages with final thoughts. All right, Ryan, so it is that time. Pretty good week, man. I really enjoyed this week's films, Diving Bell and the Butterfly and Dr. Sleep. I think I enjoyed both of them more than you did, just based on the ratings. But, this still seemed like you reasonably enjoyed both films, right?
Yeah, they were good. I was never bored with either of these films, specifically seeing as how Diving Bell and the Butterfly all took place in a man's head in French, and Dr. Sleep was 3 hours, a 3-hour sequel to a classic film, which usually doesn't pan out very well. So, I'd say, pretty solid week of films.
Definitely. I agree. So, as we do, Ryan, we end with the comparison feature. What was one of the things that you noticed about these two films that sort of brought them together?
These were two films that were kind of hard to compare and contrast. I kind of leaned on the fact that Dan Torrance and Jean Doe, both of our characters, were men that were in different ways locked inside their own minds and kind of tortured by their own demons and ghosts in their own way. Mm-hmm. The Overlook and the happenings thereof and everything beyond was kind of Dan Torrance's Diving Bell, and his adventure with Abra and eventual destruction of the Overlook by way of his own demons and past was kind of his Butterfly and his awakening and his way of putting that all behind him and becoming the ghost that he always deserved to be.
Yeah, man. Oh, definitely. I totally appreciate that. Yeah. I think I have kind of it's tangentially related. I think that this is what's interesting about both of these films is that they, in essence, both argue about the power of the mind. I think that's the sort of central theme that really connects both of these films. Because with Diving Bell, obviously we have a character where his mind is active, but his body is not. And so he's basically just all thoughts, all mentality, all mind. And as difficult as that can be at first, he's basically able to strengthen his resolve. He's able to come to terms with just the nature of a situation. And he's also able to create this beautiful metaphor in the butterfly and then use that to harness the power of his imagination. And in doing this, he's able to create this wonderful book and give his life meaning in its final stages and still go out with a sort of very strong contribution. And he's able to do that strictly by the power of his mind. And in the same way, Dr. Sleep argues that the more powerful person or the more powerful energy vampire or person with the shine or whatever it is the stronger mind, right? So Abra and Danny are both coveted for their life force because of the powers of their minds. And Rose is ultimately all powerful and the leader of the knot because her mind is the more powerful. And again, the movie states that those with the most powerful minds carry the most powerful life energy. So I think that just by virtue of these different statements that the films make, they both end up arguing that the mind is the most powerful thing that we have. And ultimately it's who's ever is stronger that is going to win in these, great battles for life, death, and whatever is beyond. All right, man. Well, hey, I know that one of both of our favorite aspects of this program is the end part here where we get to choose our 2 new films for the next episode. We, of course, do this using our master list, which just has a beautiful 170 films on it. And we're going to go ahead and pick 2 of them randomly here with our random number generator. So let's see what we got here. Hit me! All right, so for our first trick, we are going to roll, and we are going to come back with 1 out of 170 puts us at 31. Now, Ryan, I think we're going to have to take a minute here and just check this one out. I can already tell you this is probably going to be one of my infamous additions to the list that I don't remember because I was probably drunk when I added it. A movie.
Fantastic.
It's a movie called Dagon, Dagon. And
no. Yeah, I have no idea what that is. You
Yeah.
gonna look that one up?
Yeah, no, I totally do. See, it's funny, listeners, because like a lot of times I'll just be scrolling these random lists, right? Like probably because I don't want to be working at the time or something, right? And so I'll just go and check out really obscure lists and recommendations and things, and then I'll be like, oh, that's a perfect film for the program. I should put it on the list. And then I'll completely forget what it's about. So, when something comes up, like if it's like a Crooklyn or, Hunt for Wilder People, 1 Hour Photo, I can tell you that these films are, from Spike Lee and Taika Waititi and Mark Romanek, right? But every now and then we're going to get one of these films like a Dagon. I'm looking at another one that's later in our list, Gozu. No idea what that is, but know that I put it on there. So yeah, every now and then we're going to get that. Ryan, you got something for us?
From 2001. This is an hour and a half fantasy horror mystery. Boating accident runs a young man and woman ashore in a decrepit Spanish fishing town, which they discover is in the grips of an ancient sea god and its monstrous half-human offspring. I'm in.
Oh, dude, this is Stuart Gordon.
Yes.
Oh, dude, I mean, Stuart Gordon,
this is,
for those that don't
based
know.
on a book by H.P. Lovecraft.
It's based on a short story by H.P. Lovecraft. And for those that don't know, Stuart Gordon brought us the incomparable Reanimator as well as From Beyond.
Yeah. I didn't know he was still making movies in 2001. That's awesome.
I didn't either. I mean, he unfortunately, and to give all respect, I mean, he passed away, I believe, last year, if not the year before, which was very unfortunate. But it turns out, I mean, he did Dolls. Like, he's done a ton more movies than just those two films. So, yeah, dude, I'm all about it, man. I mean,
he did a movie in 2005 called Edmund with William H. Macy that I remember seeing on video shelves forever.
Really?
And I always wanted to rent it. Yeah.
And so it looks like...
Yeah, he's still out there.
Yeah, and it looks like, I can't tell, like, this is either a Spanish film or it was an American film released in Spain. Can you tell?
I have no input on that, but we're going to find out.
All right,
I hope it's like watchable. Okay. It says it's on Prime Video for $3.99. So
yeah, for sure. So okay, cool, man. All right, well that's definitely interesting. Looking forward to that one. One of the great things of the way that this program works, like we always find ourselves watching films like that we kind of forget about, and most of the time they end up being awesome. So we got Dagon, which, do you think that's how you pronounce it? Dagon.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll hear it
because it looks like dragon without an R, so I'm going Dagon.
Okay.
All right, let's check out this second film, man. Let's see what we got. See if we recognize it or not. Interesting. Okay, so the random number generator is truly random, and it's keeping us in the top 30. So for our second number, we're looking at 18. And when I go to 18. Now, here's the great thing. Both of us have seen this movie. If you're anything like me, it's been a really long time, and it's going to be fun to go back and check it out. The classic Steve Martin, Eddie Murphy comedy, Bowfinger.
Yes!
Right?
Awesome.
And dude, I mean, Bowfinger is just one of the all-time classic, like, movie, film, satire sort of films. And, like, I mean, if you haven't, anybody listening, if you like movies and have not seen Bowfinger, you are in for a damn treat, man. This is a good one.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think of when this came out. I want to say this was right around when Eddie Murphy went, like, super commercial. And kind of
like mid-90s or so, maybe, right?
Even early 2000s, I want to say, when he started doing all the Dr. Dolittle films and all of that, and started making family-friendly fare. It's also kind of the last time we saw Steve Martin for a minute. I don't remember him making a whole lot after this. He kind of went away. So this is kind of the last time I remember seeing classic Eddie Murphy and classic Steve Martin being totally silly and over the top. I loved it. And there's some great guest stars and cameo appearances and stuff in the film as well. I think Heather Graham even makes her way in, if I'm not mistaken. Been a while, though.
No, she definitely has a supporting role. And Ryan, I actually just checked it out. Bowfinger is from the heralded, arguably greatest year in cinematic history, 1999.
Wow, that you want to call that the greatest year in cinematic history?
Oh yeah, have we not talked about this? The greatness of the year 1999,
no.
as it relates to
enlighten
films?
me. Actually, you know what? Save it. Let's go ahead and save that for the Bowfinger episode.
Yes.
Everyone, stay tuned. This is a long. We're sitting at a nice, pretty time limit for our episode today because we did cover a 3-hour film. So I want to go ahead and spare the listeners another 45 minutes.
Well, and
on
the
our
funny
diatribe into film history. We'll save it for the Bowfinger episode.
We will save it, but the funny thing too is we're totally going to make it up to all you guys next week because you guys have 2 90-minute movies. So you can bang out your entire homework in one evening, okay?
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah, no,
and it's
we all
by
can.
Frank Oz. Holy shit, that's right. I forgot Bowfinger was by Frank Oz.
Written by Steve Martin, Eddie Murphy playing dual twin roles. It's such a good film. I don't think I've seen it in a decade at least, and I can't wait to revisit it, man.
Awesome. And we get to compare it to an H.P. Lovecraft Stuart Gordon film. That's fantastic listening for the
So I think we're in for a really fun week. This is definitely not going to be a Solaris and Wild Strawberries weekend. Certainly not going to be a Paths of Glory High and Low weekend. It's gonna be a fun one. So
what are we doing in between? I got some time to kill. You got a half-episode for me?
I think I actually have one just waiting in the wings. So our next episode, for those that listen, you know that we alternate between the full episodes and the half episodes. At the time we're recording this, the great Sean Connery has just recently passed away within the last couple of weeks. And so in the spirit of both our show and in homage to him, we are going to go with the arguably classic, depending on who you talk to, Zardoz. That's right, Zardoz. And if you have not seen Zardoz, you are in for the weirdest head trip sci-fi film that you have seen in a really long time. This is just some straight from the 70s oddball whackness, psychedelic what the fuckedness. And I think, honestly, dude, I've only ever seen it once. And I may have been fucked up at the time because I really do not remember it too well.
You and I watched this together.
Okay, well, that explains it. We certainly were.
This was right around I think this was the same day you introduced me to what Los Angeles street corn was.
Delicious.
So that was quite a day in my life.
Corn. Yeah, no, dude, this was some formative experiences right there.
Yeah. Sean Connery in a slingshot bikini and some Mexican street corn. I'm all about it. Let's do this. Either way, lather up my street corn with mayonnaise and let's get on with it.
So once again, guys, the next episode is going to be a half-episode where we are going to look at Zardoz. And then after that, we're going to have a full episode featuring 2 films, Dagon and Bowfinger. So gonna be a great episode. Or Dagon. Who's to say? Or maybe it's like, the French it's French, the G is silent. It's like Dagon or something like that,
Yeah. Or maybe it's Bowfinger. I don't know.
Bowfinger.
Let's just watch these movies, Jason.
As a reminder, we do love hearing from you guys. We've got a couple ways that you can get at us. First, go ahead and check out Esoterica Cinema on the Instagram. We have some really awesome pictures that we post there with the films that we're looking at. We've got some quotes up there. Really nice layout. So check us out on the Gram. Go ahead and reach out. Check us out. You can also hit us up on the Twitter. Keep it to 280 characters. We are at Esoterica Cinema. And finally, of course, we have the traditional old email. That one is esotericacinema@gmail.com. So You can let us know if you're really pissed off that the other day we made you watch Sweet Sweetback and now your mom's never going to talk to you again. You can totally reach out and let us know that we're not nearly as funny as we think that we are. You also can send us nice things. That's allowed too. If you'd like our program, feel free to reach out. And then, of course, there's somebody out there who's going to be, without even knowing it, about to or actively having the best muffin of their life, and they're not going to have anyone to talk to. And so for you out there eating that muffin, please reach out and let us know on the Twitter, on the email, on the Instagram. Guys, it has been a lot of fun. Ryan, this was a great episode. As always, I had a great time with you, and I can't wait to do it again. So thanks everyone for joining us for this week's episode of Esoterica Cinema. We'll see you next time.
From acclaimed author Ashton Macaulay comes the novel people are hailing as an instant classic, Whiteout, a Nick Ventnor adventure. Kristen Walls says, Ashton Macaulay has brought to life an amazing world of the supernatural. Kyle Bennon remarks, Whiteout does an amazing job of mixing suspense, drama, and humour. Alicia Jewett says, Whiteout is a thrilling story with great writing, the kind of book that has you wanting to reach for the next one as soon as you finish the last page. And Nathan Hodgson exclaims, the pages practically turn themselves. Whiteout by Ashton Macaulay, available in ebook, hardcover, and paperback versions, online and everywhere books are sold. Published by Aberrant Literature.